This is the world's largest stock exchange building in New York City. This is the building that gave birth to America's worst depression 100 years ago. A depression in which lots of people became unemployed and the whole of America was caught in the grip of poverty. People were ready to sell themselves out of this Great Depression. America now needed a messiah. Did they get this messiah? Why did America have to ban alcohol? And how did this ban make the mafias powerful there? And who was this Robin Hood Chicago whose stories are famous there till date? I am Zaid Abaid, and in the first installment of the series History of America, of History Speaks, we will show you all this. In 1918, America had won the First World War. When the soldiers returned to their country, tired of the war, they got the breaking news that alcohol has been banned in America. The 18th Amendment in the American law. Preparation, transportation, import, and purchase of alcohol through the 18th Amendment. Sale was prohibited. This amendment came into force on January 16, 1919. As soon as the 18th Amendment came into force, the liquor stocked in the bars started being wasted. Many clubs and shops put up boards that liquor is not available here. Those who like to buy liquor should stay away. In a business country like America, the ban on liquor was not imposed without any reason. For this, a movement was going on since the 19th century. Two big organizations, Women Christian Union and Anti-Saloon League, were present in this movement. Apart from this, other women organizations were also running a movement for the ban on liquor. The argument of those against drinking liquor was that men come home drunk, harass their wives and children, waste their hard-earned money on liquor, become poor, then start committing crimes, and finally, fed up with the difficulties of life, they commit suicide. During all this, their wives and children are ruined. On the other hand, the rich people who make and sell alcohol are getting rich by eating the earnings of the poor. These were their agents. The posters that were designed to ban on alcohol showed that women and children were demanding a ban on alcohol, while the winemaker was saying that support alcohol, so that my coffers keep getting filled. Such posters were also designed in which women were shown attacking bars. As shown in this poster, women are destroying the wine drums in the form of horse-riding crusader knights. In this second poster, a woman is breaking a wine bottle with a hammer. Children were also made to protest that for our sake, Abba John should give up alcohol. Because of this movement, alcohol was banned in many states since the 19th century itself. For example, 185-18552. So anyway, friends, this organization and these people who were running a campaign for ban against alcohol since the last century, even during the First World War, he was a great leader and he ran many campaigns. Campaigns were conducted all over America in which the new slogan was that vote dry, vote for the ban on alcohol. Due to this vote dry campaign, the 18th Amendment was passed in which drinking alcohol was banned on every occasion except religious matters. By implementing these restrictions, the situation of America would improve, especially in Idar Pali, and crime would also reduce. On the contrary, a whole underground network of preparation and sale of alcohol came into existence. A new network came into existence, which was now controlled by the mafias. Then gang wars also started in the mafia gangs to control the liquor business. These wars were named beer wars. You know that beer is also a lightly flavored type of alcohol. So these beer wars and underground wars gave birth to many mafia dons. The most famous of which was Scarface, i.e. Al Capo. Scarface was such a nickname of Italian-American don Al Capo that it was known only behind his back. It could be said that no one dared to say this in front of him. The reason for this name was that there were long knife marks on his left cheek. Al Capone 18999, 18999 in 1919. That is, the year when alcohol was banned in America. 20 years later, Al Capone was also killed in Chicago. He progressed rapidly in the world of crime and laid the foundation of the Chicago Outfit, the most powerful gang in Chicago. Through this gang, Al Capone took over the liquor business in Chicago. During this time, Al Capone ruthlessly crushed whoever came in his way. On February 14, 1929, Valentine's Day, Al Capone's companions, disguised as police, killed people along with the opposing gang. The murderers could never be caught. Friends, Al Capone had dug such a hold on Chicago that even government officials and politicians used to swear by him. Even the mayor of the city, William Thompson, was loyal to him. Al Capone used to say that when I was in Chicago, came in my pocket. He had only $0 in his pocket, and then this was a city in which he earned 50 lakhs and $5 million annually. He became the sole owner of hundreds of clubs and gambling dens. Al Cap also used to do charity generously. He built free kitchens for the poor people where they were given free food. Due to these charitable works, common people also called him the Robin Hood of Chicago. During the reign of Al Cap, not only him, the ban on alcohol had practically corrupted the entire American society. Even the White House was not safe from it. President 1G Harding, who was the president of America from 1921 to 1923, was very fond of alcohol. Therefore, the government departments which used to confiscate alcohol used to serve it openly in the White House parties. Apart from corruption and gang war, America was also facing a huge loss, and that was that some profit mongers had started making and selling illegal alcohol, due to which the health of the drinkers was deteriorating badly. In these circumstances, there was a lot of thinking in America. The question started to arise at why the ban on alcohol should not be lifted, why it should not be regulated. Now, friends, the same America where years ago people were running a campaign for a vote dry, i.e. ban on alcohol, now people had come on the streets with new play cards. On these play cards was written, "We want beer, we want alcohol, we want alcohol." The women of Hada, who used to break the drums of alcohol with great pride, now started a campaign to make alcohol available and to lift the ban. Some people were also giving this advice that by legalizing alcohol, the government will get taxed and people will get jobs. America will progress. But friends, before the decision to ban on alcohol could be withdrawn, the fight of Al Cap started. Surprisingly, this fight was not at the hands of the police, but at the hands of the lawyer. In this way, the son of Al Cap was enjoying a luxurious lifestyle, but his tax was not getting balanced with this lifestyle. Hence, keeping Al Cap's lifestyle in front, a case of tax evasion was filed against him. After a long court case, in 1931, Al Cap was sentenced to 11 years of imprisonment. However, he could not complete the sentence. A few years later, in 1939, he was released on medical grounds. After his release, he moved to his mansion on Palm Island near Miami Beach and spent the rest of his life there. He died in 1947. After Al Cap, the gang wars decreased, but the power of the underground mafias remained the same. Friends, you must watch our video Sicilian Mafia to know how this mafia was exposed and dismantled. Friends, during the strong campaign to end the ban on alcohol, America was hit by another problem. This problem was the Great Depression. This problem turned millions of Americans from rich to poor overnight. How did this period of hunger and poverty come to America? And how did this period end? My curious fellows, before the First World War, the stock market was the property of only a few rich people. It was considered a business, but after the war, the situation changed. Charles Mitchell, the president of New York City Bank, got an idea that why don't common people invest money in stocks? They should also invest. If they invest in the profit will increase manifold. So he established broker offices all over America. People could invest money in the stock market through these offices. More brokers also came into the field after seeing Charles Mitchell's example. Due to their efforts, soon millions of people invested their capital in the stock market, so much so that people bought shares even by taking loans. This became such a profitable business that even shoe polishers, newspaper sellers, and office boys invested money in stocks. To keep the public informed about the market, ticker tapes were distributed all over the country. This was a telegraph machine which was invented by the famous scientist Thomas Edison. From this machine, a tape or a long ribbon-like print came out on which the prices of shares were written. Updates of shares were sent on these machines after every 4 hours, and people used to pay according to it to their brokers. They used to call the people and fix new deals of shares and earn profit. Among those who earned wealth from stocks, Joseph Kennedy, father of future American President John F. Kennedy, was also included. It had become like a gold rush in which everyone wanted to make money. Seeing such greed of the people, Friends Marine had also started warning them. A big investor, Paul Varg, had given advance that if unbridled investment in stock market continues like this, then a big disaster will arise. However, the people who want to become rich overnight from stock market ignored this warning, and the result was that investment in stocks kept increasing, And a time came when the market got overloaded, meaning that only old shares were being traded in the market, new ones were not coming. Due to this, the price of shares started falling. Thus, the stock market started to collapse. The clever investors started. Recently, they had realized that the stock market had reached its lowest point and it was going to crash. So they took out their capital. These smart people, once again, included Joseph Kennedy. People's sudden withdrawal of capital created an unbelievable situation, and the market started crashing in October 1929. In American stock history, 24th and October 29th are remembered as Black Thursday and Black Tuesday because these were the 2 days in which the American stock market had completely crashed. Especially on October 29th, the market had gone bankrupt. On that day, thousands of American citizens whose capital was at stake gathered outside the market. They were furious after hearing the news of the stock market crash. No one could have stopped this mob from attacking the stock market if hundreds of mounted police had not reached there. On seeing the police, the public completely waited, but on that day, the lives of millions of Americans were lost. The entire savings of the bank was lost. In the last week of the American comedian Rashawn Marks and future British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the American stock market was forced to suffer a loss of $25 billion. As soon as the stock market crashed, the public lost hope in the financial system. People rushed to the banks and tried to withdraw their capital in cash lest it also goes waste. But the banks did not have that much money in cash. Soon the banks emptied the capital and started closing down. By 1931, 3,000 banks had closed down due to the closure of banks. The entire system of investment and interest stopped because in America, business started by taking loans from banks, and banks used to run their business by taking interest on loans. So all this stopped. Businesses started to come to a standstill, and due to the standstill, workers also started becoming unemployed. After this, the icing on the cake was that in the beginning of 1930, there was no rain, due to which very little crop was produced. There came a time when America, 25% of the population, had become unemployed. This was a time, friends, when 20 lakh people in America were victims of hunger. People fed up with poverty were forced to sell their valuables. You can guess this from this picture in which a person, who was a very famous broker, has written on the car that give me $1 and take this car. Below this, he has also written that everything of mine has been lost in the stock market. Poverty had also made many people homeless. These unemployed people had started selling things on the footpath. Even innocent children had started protesting that give our father a job, give them a job. Some people used to hang their CVs with their phones, hoping that someone would see them and give them a job. The situation was such that once 2,000 jobs were announced in the state of Ohio, then 5,000 candidates reached to give the interview. Another picture of that time is this in which a lady is sitting worried with her 2 children. This picture is a picture of the troubled crowd of America, and it shows the desperation of that time. In these circumstances, President Herbert Weaver, who had become president in 1929, became unpopular. America now needed a new leader. This new leader was Franklin D. Roswell. In 1932, a new Democratic presidential candidate, Franklin D. Roswell, came into the fray. He was the governor of the state of New York and the husband of former American President Rose Wallett's niece Eleanor. His lower torso was paralyzed due to polio, and he continued his activities with the help of crutches or a wheelchair. Rose Wallett ran her election campaign on 2 things. First, that she would improve the economy of the country. Number 2, that she would end the ban on alcohol. Number 2, she would end the amendments to the law. This campaign was successful. In the presidential elections to be held in November 1932, Rose Wallett won 42 states and achieved a landslide victory. The new president was sworn in on March 4th, 1933. In his first speech, he announced that he would tighten controls on the banking, credit, and investment system. He named this financial reform as the New Deal to implement it. However, there were many challenges before him. The first big challenge that he faced was how to restore the public's trust in the American banking system. On March 6th, 3 days after becoming the president, President Rose Wallett ordered all banks to be closed for a few days. During these holidays on March 9th, the president passed the Emergency Banking Act. It was decided in this act that in future, any bank which is facing financial difficulties will be given money from the government treasury. With this money, the banks will be able to return their money to the account holders. That is, the money of the public will be safe in the banks. This government guarantee started restoring the public's trust and boosted their morale. On March 13th, when the banks reopened, the public started queuing up to deposit money in the banks again. As soon as the capital of $1 billion came back to the banks, the business of the banks started running again. The banks started giving loans, and the stalled wheel of work started moving again. The president established the Securities and Exchange Commission and regulated the stock exchange as well. Now the government can do anything. The government could have avoided this crisis by investing money in the market at the time of crisis. After regulating the banking system and the stock market, the president paid attention to unemployment. He started giving money to the princely governments for development works. With this money, the government started working on many projects in roads, railway lines, schools, and dams. Millions of unemployed people were hired for these projects. Apart from this, a separate government organization of workers, the British Conservation Corps, was formed, which was called CCC in short. Under this scheme, 3 lakh young workers were kept on a separate government payroll. These people worked on government projects and were paid $5 per month. During the 10 years of rule, $1.7 billion were spent on development projects. The faces of the 4 most popular presidents of American history, which are made on Mount Rushmore in the American state of South Dakota, were made during this period. George Washington Thomas. These are actually the faces of Jefferson, Thomas Roswell, and Abraham Lincoln. This project was completed during the era of Franklin D. Roosevelt, so that America could not forget its great leaders. Among these plans was the Grand Coulee Dam, which was built on the Columbia River in the state of Washington. It is still one of the biggest dams in America. Electricity was also being generated from these dams, and the water problem was also solved for the people. This also improved the production of crops. Roosevelt also increased the wages of factory workers. He also gave securities to those who took houses on loan and started the process of medical insurance for the common people. Apart from this, by making the Social Security Act, financial help for the old, unemployed laborers, and poor children was also started. Friends, along with all these acts, President Roosevelt also abolished the ban on alcohol. Roosevelt's argument was that heavy tax would be earned by legalizing alcohol, and in this way the budget deficit would also be reduced. Therefore, the 21st Amendment was approved, under which the tax on alcohol would be lifted. The ban, i.e. the 18th Amendment, was abolished. Once again, the manufacture and sale of liquor became legal in America. It began with great enthusiasm. This was the first time in American history that a legal amendment was completely reversed. Americans celebrated the abolition of the ban with great fervor. Farewell, 18th Amendment was written on the bars. Kudos, 18th Amendment. Especially the young generation partied a lot on the abolition of the ban and raised interesting slogans like, "We want whiskey, we dance on the tables." Friends, President Roosevelt broke an important legal tradition with the 18th Amendment. It was like this in America since the time of his founder, George Washington, i.e. since the 18th century. There was a tradition that the American president was elected a maximum of 2 times, and no candidate became president for the 3rd time in a row. But Roosevelt broke this tradition. From 1932 to 1944, for consecutive American presidents were elected. This is why later in 1951, through the 22nd and 22nd Amendments, a ban was imposed on any president serving more than 2 terms. Anyway, in 1941, at the beginning of Roosevelt's 3rd term, America had completely come out of the Great Depression. But the reality was that Uncle Sam was moving from one problem to another. The Second World War had started in Europe in 1939. President Roosevelt had kept America on the sidelines of this war. So, after this, there were some forces that were pulling the United States towards this war. What were these forces? How did American factories turn the tables on the Second World War? How did the American forces fight the Japanese pilots? We will show you all this, but history will tell you. In the next installment of War of America Season Teach, This Baharo Kahil is the biggest American naval base in the Pacific Ocean. Pearl Harbor is the biggest American naval base in the Pacific Ocean. On December 7, 1941, in the morning of 1941, Japan attacked this base. In the massive attack by the Japanese forces, 21 American foreign ships and 347 boats were destroyed. 2335 American soldiers and officers were killed, and 1143 were injured. The Americans also killed 29 Japanese soldiers, while 5 Japanese ships were also destroyed. But with this attack, America, which was still now neutral in the Second World War, became a part of the World War. But friends, Japan was not the only one responsible for dragging America into the World War. Some responsibility for this also lay on American President Rose Wallet. Why and how did President Rose Wallet put America on the path of World War? What records did America's war industry set? In the second installment of the series History of America Season 1 of Main Hoon Phaser Rise and Deiko Suno Jano, we will show you all this. On March 11, 1941, American President Rose Wallet signed a law, Land Lease Act, which was going to make America a part of the Second World War. Under this, America started giving military and financial help to China and its other historical countries. You know that 41 was the third year of the Second World War. Hitler's Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy were dominating Europe. Poland, France, and Netherlands were still continuing the war despite facing many empires. President Rose Wallet had kept America on the sidelines of this war by passing the Neutral Act in November 1939. But his sympathizers were obviously with Britain. Rose Wallet thought that Britain was a democracy, and it was fighting against the dictatorship of Germany and Italy. That is why she gave the history of America, because America was also a democratic country like Britain. She also thought that helping Britain militarily and financially was very important for America's security. That is, if tomorrow Germany and Italy open an army against America, then Britain will become their only ally. So she started helping Britain in advance. On the other hand, under the Land Lease Act, she started giving financial help to China as well, because it was also fighting against Japan. Japan gave the history of Germany, and Italy against America. Then Japan was also trying to establish a big empire in the Pacific Ocean. It had gained control over a large area from Taiwan to Vietnam and Cambodia. In 1931, it started attacking China as well, and in 10 years, a large area of it was captured. We have already shown you this story in detail in the History of China series. So, because of this occupation, Rose Wallet had started considering the growing military power of Japan as a threat to America. Many American colonies, including the Philippines, were present near the Japanese Empire. President Rose Wallet himself wanted Japan not to attack them as well. Apart from this, Rose Wallet had very good relations with Chiang Kai-shek, the head of the nationalist government of China. Hence, under the Lease Act, China also started getting American help. Thus, Rose Wallet knowingly or unknowingly brought America very close to the theater of the Second World War. But friends, Japan, which had come very close to the American colony, could not fight America immediately. The reason for this was oil. Japan used to import 90% of its oil needs from America or Indonesia and Malaysia. Now, Indonesia was a colony of the Netherlands and Malaysia was a British colony, meaning Japan was dependent on America for oil or not. The alliance was dependent on them. So it was a little hesitant to fight a war with America. But what happened was that the growing Japanese advance in China made the President Rose Wallet so restless that he took an extreme step. He, along with Britannia and Netherlands, stopped the supply of oil to Japan in July 41. This restriction forced Japan to come and occupy Indonesia and Malaysia for oil, but to reach them it was necessary to pass through the American colony Philippines. The Philippines could and did get help from the American naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. That is why Japan planned to neutralize this base, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And as a result of this, friends, the attack took place which we have shown you in the beginning of the video. By the way, you can also watch the complete documentary film of this attack in this video of DSJ's Second World War. Anyway, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, on December 11th, Germany and Italy also declared war against America in support of their alliance with Japan. Thus, friends, America officially entered the Second World War, the major responsibility of which goes to President Roosevelt. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Air Force targeted the American air bases in the Philippine capital Manila as well. After this, the Japanese forces started landing in the Philippines through boats. Their biggest battle with the American Army took place in the Bataan area, west of the Philippine capital Manila. The American troops spread out in the jungles here and started fighting the attacking Japanese by laying ambush. After the destruction of Pearl Harbor, the supply line of the Americans was cut off, but despite this, they fought the Japanese forces bravely here for many months. So, with the help of tanks, we were able to defeat the Japanese forces. The Japanese soldiers kept on attacking and kept raining fire on the American fronts with flamethrowers. When the Americans ran out of food and weapons, 36,000 soldiers surrendered in May 1942. The American soldiers laid down their arms. The American commander Douglas MacArthur left his army there and fled to Australia. While leaving, he announced that I have told the people of the Philippines that I will return. After this, the Japanese flag was flying in place of the American flag in the Philippines. After the Philippines, the Japanese advanced and forced the Idahoans to surrender in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore as well. In this way, their oil supply was restored and fuel started reaching them. But now they also had to face the entire war machine of America. The biggest strength of America in the Second World War was its war industry. America had started preparing weapons on a large scale during its neutrality in 1940. After the Pearl Harbor attack, the preparation of weapons increased even more, and thousands of Chilean factories were set up, and the plants were also converted into armament factories. So much labor was hired to work in these factories that unemployment in America was almost eradicated. At least 2 crore Americans came from villages and small towns to work in these factories. Women were also hired on a large scale. They started making every war material from ammunition to bullets, shells, and uniforms. At one time, 3% of the workforce in the ready-made factories was women. This workforce was making 170 ready-made and 50 cargo ships every day for America in 1943. This speed increased further the next year, and in 1944, America was making 1 ship every 5 minutes. Obviously, more than 170 ships were made in a day. Apart from this, 8 aircraft carriers were also being made every month under the Land Cruiser program. Many of these weapons were supplied to the Allies. America also provided military aid of $9 billion every month to the Allies, which is equivalent to $50 billion in the modern era. Under the No Plan, America provided the maximum aid to Britain. After this came Soviet Russia, which was attacked by Germany in June 1941. America also supplied a large number of weapons and tanks, etc., to Russia. During the Second World War, the American war industry manufactured 141 aircraft carriers, more than 8,500 cruise ships, 32,750 destroyers, more than 86,000 tanks, 26 lakh machine guns, 41 billion bullets and shells. America's production was more than combined production of Soviet Russia and Britain. The most surprising thing is that the total number of weapons Germany and Japan made annually, their production was double that of America. It was impossible for these 2 countries to win the arms race. Apart from arms, America also produced 43 crore 40 lakh tons of steel. America exported the steel to its allies to make arms. Friends, American help soon started turning the tables of the Second World War in favor of the Allies. Soviet Russia started defeating Germany one after the other, especially during the Battle of Grad. In February 1943, about 1 lakh German soldiers surrendered. On the other hand, in Egypt, Britain gave a humiliating defeat to the army of German General Rommel with the help of tanks in the Battle of Al-Manar. Friends, America had deployed more than 1 crore 60 lakh troops for the Second World War. American forces had to fight in 2 oceans, one in the Atlantic Ocean against Germany and Italy, and the other in the Pacific Ocean against the Japanese. America had started military operations in both the places at the right time, and the Americans carried out their first major attack against Italy in northern Africa. Here in May 1943, along with the Bataan Army, they forced more than 2 lakh German and Italian soldiers to surrender. This way, the Allied powers would have control over northern Africa. During this time, the American President Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill met in the Iranian capital Tehran. In this historic meeting, important decisions related to the war were taken on this occasion. But Stalin raised a toast and said, "This toast is in the name of American productions, without which we were bound to lose this war." In the same year, i.e. 1943, in 1943, America and the United Nations began attacking Italy. Fierce fighting continued for many months. On the last day of June 4th, 1944, the American army captured the Italian capital, Rome. The Germans had established a puppet government in northern Italy under the Italian dictator Mussolini. In the last days of the war, this rule of Mussolini also ended and he was murdered. Friends, you can also watch this documentary on Mussolini's life on Watch Sun Jano. 2 days after the capture of Rome on June 4th, on June 6th, D-Day was decided. The day was decided when the American and Canadian forces attacked the coast of Normandy in German-occupied France. 5,000 foreign aircraft were participating in this attack, most of which were operated by the U.S. Apart from this, 2,000 Marines, mostly American, heavily bombed the German forces. In this battle, the American army attacked Utah and Omaha beaches. Utah Beach was captured by the U.S. after a few casualties. In Omaha, the American army had to suffer heavy casualties. Finally, an American ship wiped out the German fronts with its cannons. Thus, the American forces also captured Omaha. During this time, the Bataan and Canadian forces also captured the remaining 3 beaches, Sard and Gold and Juno. After this success, the American and Allied forces rapidly spread in France. Now, Indonesia was a colony of the Netherlands and Malaysia was a British colony, meaning Japan was dependent on America for oil or not. The alliance was dependent on them. So it was a little hesitant to fight a war with America, but what happened was that the growing Japanese advance in China made the President Roosevelt so restless that he took an extreme step. He, along with Britannia and Netherlands, stopped the supply of oil to Japan in July 41. This restriction forced Japan to come and occupy Indonesia and Malaysia for oil, but to reach them it was necessary to pass through the American colony Philippines. The Philippines could and did get help from the American naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. That is why Japan planned to neutralize this base, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and as a result of this, friends, the attack took place which we have shown you in the beginning of the video. By the way, you can also watch the complete documentary film of this attack in this video of DSJ's Second World War. Anyway, after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 11th, Germany and Italy also declared war against America in support of their alliance with Japan. Thus, friends, America officially entered the Second World War, the major responsibility of which goes to President Roosevelt. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Air Force targeted the American air bases in the Philippine capital Manila as well. After this, the Japanese forces started landing in the Philippines through boats. Their biggest battle with the American army took place in the Bataan area, west of the Philippine capital Manila. The American troops spread out in the jungles here and started fighting the attacking Japanese by laying ambush. After the destruction of Pearl Harbor, the supply line of the Americans was cut off, but despite this, they fought the Japanese forces bravely here for many months. So, with the help of tanks, we were able to defeat the Japanese forces. The Japanese soldiers kept on attacking and kept raining fire on the American fronts with flamethrowers. When the Americans ran out of food and weapons, 36,000 soldiers surrendered in May 1942. The American soldiers laid down their arms. The American commander Douglas MacArthur left his army there and fled to Australia. While leaving, he announced that I have told the people of the Philippines that I will return. After this, the Japanese flag was flying in place of the American flag in the Philippines. After the Philippines, the Japanese advanced and forced the Idahoans to surrender in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore as well. In this way, Their oil supply was restored and fuel started reaching them, but now they also had to face the entire war machine of America. The biggest strength of America in the Second World War was its war industry. America had started preparing weapons on a large scale during its neutrality in 1940, after the Pearl Harbor attack. The preparation of weapons increased even more, and thousands of civilian factories were set up, and the plants were also converted into armament factories. So much labor was hired to work in these factories that unemployment in America was almost eradicated. At least 2 crore Americans came from villages and small towns to work in these factories. Women were also hired on a large scale. They started making every war material from ammunition to bullets, shells, and uniforms. At one time, 3% of the workforce in the ready-made factories was women. This workforce was making 170 ready-made and 50 cargo ships every day for America in 1943. The speed increased further the next year, and in 1944, America was making 1 ship every 5 minutes. Obviously, more than 170 ships were made in a day. Apart from this, 8 aircraft carriers were also being made every month under the Land Cruiser program. Many of these weapons were supplied to the Allies. America also provided military aid of $9 billion every month to the Allies, which is equivalent to $50 billion in the modern era. Under the Null Plan, America provided the maximum aid to Britain. After this came Soviet Russia, which was attacked by Germany in June 1941. America also supplied large number of weapons and tanks, etc., to Russia. During the Second World War, the American war industry manufactured 141 aircraft carriers, more than 8,500 cruise ships, 32,750 destroyers, more than 86,000 tanks, 26 lakh machine guns, 41 billion bullets and shells. America's production was more than combined production of Soviet Russia and Britain. The most surprising thing is that the total number of weapons Germany and Japan made annually, their production was double that of America. It was impossible for these 2 countries to win the arms race. Apart from arms, America also produced 43 crore 40 lakh tons of steel. America exported this steel to its allies to make arms. Friends, American help soon started turning the tables of the Second World War in favor of the Allies. Soviet Russia started defeating Germany one after the other, especially during the Battle of Grad. In February 1943, about 1 lakh German soldiers surrendered. On the other hand, in Egypt, Britain gave a humiliating defeat to the army of German General Rommel with the help of tanks in the Battle of Al-Manar. Friends, America had deployed more than 1 crore 60 lakh troops for the Second World War. American forces had to fight in 2 oceans, one in the Atlantic Ocean against Germany and Italy, and the other in the Pacific Ocean against the Japanese. America had started military operations in both the places at the right time, and the Americans carried out their first major attack against Italy in northern Africa. Here in May 1943, along with the Bataan Army, they forced more than 2 lakh German and Italian soldiers to surrender. This way, the Allied powers would have control over northern Africa. During this time, the American President Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill met in the Iranian capital Tehran. In this historic meeting, important decisions related to the war were taken on this occasion. But Stalin raised a toast and said, "This toast is in the name of American productions, without which we were bound to lose this war." In the same year, i.e. 1943, in 1943, America and the United Nations began attacking Italy. Fierce fighting continued for many months. On the last day of June 4th, 1944, the American army captured the Italian capital Rome. The Germans had established a puppet government in northern Italy under the Italian dictator Mussolini. In the last days of the war, this rule of Mussolini also ended, and he was murdered. Friends, you can also watch this documentary on Mussolini's life on Watch Sun Jano. 2 days after the capture of Rome on June 4th, on June 6th, D-Day was decided. The day was decided when the American and Canadian forces attacked the coast of Normandy in German-occupied France. 5,000 foreign aircraft were participating in this attack, most of which were operated by the U.S. Apart from this, 2,000 Marines, mostly American, heavily bombed the German forces. In this battle, the American Army attacked Utah and Omaha beaches. Utah Beach was captured by the U.S. after few casualties. In Omaha, the American Army had to suffer heavy casualties. Finally, an American ship wiped out the German fronts with its cannons. Thus, the American forces also captured Omaha. During this time, the Bataan and Canadian forces also captured the remaining 3 beaches, Sard and Gold and Juno. After the success, the American and Allied forces rapidly spread in France. In August 1944, the Ittihad forces also liberated Paris from the enemy Germany. Along with the ground war, the American forces were also heavily bombing the German capital Berlin and many cities, especially the German city of Schönfurt, where there were many military factories. This was a special target of the American forces. 1943 During 1943, America made at least 2 big attacks on Schönfurt. German factories were damaged in these attacks. America had to pay a heavy price for this, and about 200 of its warships were destroyed. But you know that America was producing a new warship every 5 minutes at that time. In terms of such fast production, this price was nothing because Germany could not drop an American warship every 5 minutes. Now, the situation was such that America from the west and Russian army from the east were advancing towards Berlin. Russian army reached Berlin first, and they captured the city. On April 30th, German dictator Adolf Hitler committed suicide. A few days before this incident, American and Russian forces had gathered on Dr. Alba in the west of Berlin. Soldiers from both sides shook hands with each other, had drinks, played music, and sang fada songs. Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945. Italy surrendered in 1945. Italy had already been out of the war after capturing Rome a year before, but in the Pacific Ocean, however, their alliance with Japan was firm despite difficult conditions. America had achieved its first victory against Japan in 1942 in the Pacific Ocean near Midway Island. In this battle, American and Japanese aircraft carriers clashed. American air forces destroyed 4 aircraft carriers of the Japanese, while they also sank another big ship at Tabak. The Japanese were able to destroy only 1 American aircraft carrier. 150 American and 248 Japanese aircraft were also destroyed in this war. The important thing among the destroyed Japanese aircraft carriers was that Ukagi was also included. This was the same aircraft carrier that had taken part in the attack on Pearl Harbor. In fact, it had led this attack. In 1944, the Northern Mariana Islands in the Pacific Ocean also came under American occupation. Here, American and Japanese forces clashed on the Saipan Island. A fierce battle was fought on this island. Vice Admiral Nigam was also a commander. He had commanded the First Air Fleet, the Japanese fleet that attacked Pearl Harbor. When the American forces began to advance into the island, Admiral Romo committed suicide to avoid arrest. A year before this, Yamamoto's plane, the main plan of the Pearl Harbor attack, was also shot down by the Americans near the Solomon Islands. The Americans named this action Operation Vengeance. After occupying the Northern Mariana Islands, America established its air bases in this area. B-29 super fortresses were stationed here. Apart from this, America also established airports in China, where the American allied Chanchak was ruling. The planes flying from these bases began heavy bombing of Japanese cities. Many cities, including the capital of Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka, were badly destroyed. Tokyo alone witnessed heavy bombing on the 9th and the 10th of March 1945. 1 lakh civilians were killed in the middle of the night in October 1944. American forces started landing on the shores of the Philippines. American General Douglas MacArthur, who had earlier fled to Australia, was responsible for this. The Japanese were now leading the Japanese army. As soon as they landed on the Philippines shore, they announced on the radio that the Philippines are here. After months of fighting, the American forces reached Darul, Manila. There was a fierce fight, even in the streets, to capture Manila. The American forces used tanks a lot against the strong Japanese positions. The Americans were also heavily bombing Manila from the air. The bombing caused severe damage to the buildings and bridges in the city. Many buildings and bridges were destroyed. Almost the whole city became a pile of rubble. Despite the strong resistance of the Japanese, the American army continued to advance into the city. After the American siege became tight, many Japanese soldiers also surrendered in March 1945. By the beginning of 1945, the American army had already captured Manila. However, fighting continued in many areas of the Philippines to the end of the Second World War. This iconic picture is also from the same period when in early 1945, the Americans captured an important Japanese island, Iwo Jima. On April 15, 1945, American forces attacked the important Japanese island of Okinawa. This island was about 650 kilometers away from mainland Japan. After gaining control over it, it would have been easy for America to land troops in Japan. The Okinawa attack was named Operation Iceberg. 54,55 to 45,000 American soldiers were taking part in it. They were getting help from America's Fifth Fleet, which also included some Bataan ships. When the American troops entered Okinawa, the Japanese did not fire on them. As soon as the American army entered the jungle away from the shore, they started being attacked heavily. Okinawa proved to be a tough task for the Americans. America had to pay a heavy price in terms of loss. In this war, Japanese pilots carried out massive suicide attacks on the American Fifth Fleet near Okinawa. These attacks were called operational. Hundreds of Japanese pilots collided their prepared American ships with these Japanese ships. In the attacks, 36 American foreign ships were destroyed. Apart from this, 368 foreign ships were damaged. Nearly 5,000 American soldiers were killed, and almost the same number were injured. America also suffered the loss of 763 American ships which came with this fleet. On the other hand, more than 12,000 American soldiers were killed on Okinawa, while nearly 37,000 soldiers were injured. But the victory was still the Americans because they had a lot of firepower. The American soldiers kept moving forward, clearing each Japanese position. In the Battle of Nawa, 94,000 Japanese soldiers and 909,000 civilians were killed. Even today in Okinawa, it is believed that thousands of civilians committed suicide instead of getting arrested at the behest of the Japanese forces. Apart from these, countless soldiers and civilians were arrested by the Americans. Among them, 1,010 were Japanese soldiers. Children and child soldiers were also included in the attack. Both the main commanders of the Japanese army in Okinawa, General Ashijima and General Chu, had committed suicide. Due to the bombing by the Americans, Okinawa's capital now was also completely razed aground. By the end of June, America had completely captured Okinawa and the surrounding areas. Now, the American army was ready to land in Japan, but about 20 lakh fresh Japanese soldiers were waiting for the Americans there. America could have suffered heavy losses in a full-fledged attack on Japan. To avoid these losses, America needed a tough decision. This decision was obviously to be taken by the American president. But the experienced American President Roosevelt, who was in the White House for 12 years, was no longer alive and had passed away on April 12, 1945. In his place, Vice President Harry Truman was made the president in a hurry. He decided to take the extreme step against Japan, that is, the decision to use the atom bomb, after which it is obvious that America did not have to bring down its army. America successfully experimented with the atom bomb on July 16, 1945. This experiment was done in the Sahara region of the American state of New Mexico under the code name of Trinity. The nuclear bomb was exploded by homing it on a 100-feet-high tower. After the successful experiment, America had prepared at least 3 more atom bombs, which were now to be dropped on Japan. On the morning of August 6, the American B-29 bomber took off from the island of Mariana Islands. Its name was Enola Gay and it had an atom bomb weighing about 5 tons, which was named Little Boy. According to the local time of Hiroshima, this atom bomb was dropped at 8:155 minutes. The bomb was dropped and exploded in the air above Shima Hospital, a major hospital of the city. This horrific explosion completely turned most of the city into a pile of straw. You can see these 2 pictures. One is before the explosion, in which buildings are visible in the central part of the city, but this picture taken after the explosion is completely blank. This part of the city was wiped out. 80,000 people were killed on the spot in the explosion, while 60,000 more people died due to wounds and injuries in the next few months. Thus, the number of dead reached almost 140,000. 3 days after this attack, on August 9th, another B-29 Barbaro took off from Nyanas. In this, too, an atom bomb named Fat Man was kept. The bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki at 11:01 p.m. Another horrific explosion took place in Nagasaki. The central part also got wiped out like the Hiroshima area. More than 40,000 people perished in a moment. A few days later, on August 15th, the Japanese Emperor Hiroshita announced to lay down arms. On September 2nd, 1945, the surrender document was signed on the U.S. warship USS Missouri. After the surrender, America occupied Japan and South Korea. In the Second World War, 99 American soldiers were killed. However, America had achieved a great victory, and it had now become a superpower. But as soon as the Second World War ended, a struggle began between America and Soviet Russia for a global order of their own choice. This struggle is now called the Cold War. This Cold War took America into new wars and dragged it into new issues. One of these wars was the Korean War. In this war, America had to face a huge loss. It had to face an enemy that made it bite the dust. What was America like after the Second World War? What was the world like after the Second World War, which America now had to deal in the presence of Soviet Russia? What color was the fear of the atom bomb going to show in the world? And in the Ider Pally installment of Mudaka Ider Pally, after the Second World War, two superpowers emerged on the world map. One was the United States of America, and the other was Soviet Russia. A war for power control over the world began between these two powers, which we know today as the Cold War. This war was not just between two powers, but between two regimes. America was a strong supporter of the capitalist regime, i.e. capitalism. On the other hand, Soviet Russia and its communist bloc stood with communism. Both could prove their respective regimes more successful in the world. This race was on in every field, from the preparation of nuclear weapons to space exploration to Kalak smugglers. How in this race, both the world powers had left no stone unturned to humiliate each other. What was the result of the confrontation between America and China and Korea, and how did Uncle Sam America become the political and financial leader of the world? I am Faisal Raich, and look, listen, know that in the third installment of the History of America series Season 3, we will show you all this. Ma cuz fellows, in the world after the Second World War, America had gained an advantage over its opponent Soviet Russia. The reason for this was America's strong economy. You have already known in the previous video that Soviet Russia also won the Second World War with the help of weapons provided by America. So, even in the post-war world, America was far ahead of Russia in terms of both money and military power. You can guess this by the fact that in 1950, America's GDP was $300 billion, while Soviet Russia's GDP was just $132 billion. Along with physical power, America was number one in military power as well because it had the world's most powerful weapon, the atom bomb. Then there was also the fact that world institutions such as the World Bank and the headquarters of IMF were also established in America. America's power increased a lot in comparison to the public, especially because it had the world's most powerful security body in the name of Security Council. Soviet Russia was given the power of veto. Thus, America could establish the global system of its choice all over the world. Now, see, friends, America had the atomic bomb. It had control over the world authority like UNO, IMF, and World Bank. It had become the military and financial leader of the world. Soviet Russia did not have all this, but it was not going to accept defeat. As a global power, it kept quietly engaged in the preparation of the atomic bomb. Finally, in 1949, Russia conducted a successful atomic experiment in Pakistan. This news was no less than a blast for the Americans that the superpower competing with them was also becoming an atomic power. An even bigger shock for the Americans was the fact that Russia had made the atomic bomb with the help of the drawings of the Americans. How did this drawing reach Russia from America? Friends, America had prepared atomic bombs under the Manhattan Project during the Second World War. The most important work on this project was done by the science man of Los Alamos Laboratory. This secret laboratory was in the American state of New Mexico. It was established after the nuclear explosions in Russia. British intelligence sent an important information to the Americans that Russia's nuclear program was completed by stealing an important drug from this laboratory. Inquiries started in America. Many scientists and engineers were arrested. The most important name among them was David Greenglass. He was accused of having transferred the drawings and notes related to the nuclear project to Russia. His wife, Ruth Greenglass, was also involved in this case. But friends, David bargained with the American authorities that if he leads the investigators to the Russian spy who was actually responsible for this, they would give him leniency. He would be given a lesser punishment, and his wife would be pardoned. When this deal was done, David told that the real culprits of this incident were his sister Thel Rosenberg and brother-in-law Julius Rosenberg. According to David's story, Julius Rosenberg, who was an engineer in the American Army, was a spy for Russia. With the help of his wife Thal, he contacted David and got these drawings. The important notes that were with these drawings were typed by Thal himself. After David's ink contribution, Thal and her husband Julius Rosenberg were arrested. They were tried and sentenced to death. The case was also tried before the highest judges of American history. They had two innocent children, Michael and Robert. Both of them also participated in the movement. The spiritual leader of Catholics, Pope Francis XII, also appealed to abolish the death penalty, but on June 19, 1953, both of them were executed by sitting them on electric chairs in a New York prison. Fouiz and Fouiz's famous Zamana Nazim Hamjo Tariq was written in the context of the death penalty of this couple who were killed on the roads. Friends, this was a time when Mickham was also on the throne in America. This name was given to a Senator Joseph McCarty. He was a staunch enemy of communism. He had started taking action against people working in every department of America by accusing them of being communists. Because of Mr. Carthage, thousands of employees were fired from their jobs. Even the polio vaccine was named as a communist conspiracy. Even Charlie Chaplin, a superstar, had to face the accusation of betrayal and had to leave America and come back to Europe. What were the accusations against Mr. Carthage and his colleagues? What was its actual connection with the Rosenberg case? We have made a separate video on all this. You can also watch it. Then you must watch our video on the scientist in Manhattan Project who made the atomic bomb. Anyway, friends, Russia had made the atomic bomb by hacking the American drawings or by any other means. It did not just make the atomic bomb, but also open a new army against America. That army was an attempt to forcefully include Europe in the communist bloc. 1948 and 1948 Russia caused a communist revolution in the European country Czechoslovakia. As a result of this revolution, Czechoslovakia was cut off from the rest of Europe and became a part of Soviet Russia. After the Soviet Russia took another step and blockaded the central city of Germany, Berlin. Now, we know that after the Second World War, Germany was divided into two parts, i.e. Eastern and Western Germany. Eastern Germany was occupied by Russia, and Western Germany was under control of America, Britain, and France. Similarly, the central city of Germany, Berlin, was also divided into two parts. The western part was under control of Western powers, and the eastern part. The eastern part was under control of Russia. But the issue was that the entire Berlin city was in East Germany, in Russian-controlled Germany. Therefore, its western part was actually surrounded by Soviet Russia. Russia did that. By blockading the city, it was stopped from the supply of all kinds of goods, i.e. West Berlin became famous. The reason for this blockade was that Russia wanted to unite West Germany and East Germany and make a communist Germany. But America and its allies started the process of making West Germany a separate country. For this country, they also issued a new currency, Deutsche Mark, whose value was better than the old German currency. Russia was against the establishment of West Germany and the new currency. Therefore, to teach the Allies a lesson, it blocked West Berlin. America and its allies immediately sent food and fuel, etc., to the city through air, which kept the wheel of life moving there. Russia did not stop this airlift, so that there is no unnecessary confrontation with America. This blockade continued from June 1948 to May 1949. After this, The blockade ended, but the Soviet Russia's influence in Germany continued. The campaign continued. In 1961, Soviet Russia built a wall between the east and west of Berlin and surrounded the rest of the west with a wire. The events of Berlin and Czechoslovakia had made Soviet Russia a big threat to the American bloc. It had become necessary for the U.S. to form a big military alliance to counter this threat. So, on April 4th, 1949, when the blockade of Berlin was still going on, 12 representatives of the MUMA gathered in Washington, D.C. These representatives signed an agreement which is now called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO in short. Apart from the U.S., this organization included Britain, France, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Canada, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Later, its membership kept increasing, and today it has 31 members each. All these members, MUMA, decided that one of these, but if Russia attacks, then the entire world will be imagined as an attack. It was a joint defense and military success. Through this, it had stopped the path of communism in Europe. But America was still looking for new allies to give a tough fight to America. In Europe, it formed its own military organization in the name of Versailles Pact in 1955. This organization included Soviet Russia and its allies in Europe. The hottest part of the Cold War was Asia, where the first proper battle of the Cold War was fought. This war was the Korean War. Friends, the background of this war was that after the Second World War, like Germany, Korea was also divided into two parts. In South Korea, there was an American-backed government, while in North Korea, there was a Russian-backed communist government. A border line was drawn between the two parts, which was called the 38th parallel. Northern Korea was divided into two parts. This line was abolished, and South Korea was also captured. On June 25, 1955, 135,000 troops of North Korea attacked South Korea. In this attack, it had the full military support of Soviet Russia. This attack was so fast that the army of North Korea had captured the capital of South Korea in just 3 days. The Korean War once again started a war against the global order of America. U.S. President Harry Truman declared that if we do not help South Korea, then Russia will keep on capturing one area after another. Therefore, America started retaliatory action and also used the Security Council of the People. On June 27th, the UN Security Council approved an agreement under American pressure. In the agreement, all the members of the government were told that they should help South Korea in every way to foil the attack of North Korea. That is, America and its allies should on November 20th, 1946, the United States got permission to take military action against North Korea. Soviet Russia had boycotted the meeting, so it could not sign the agreement. Now the Army of America and its allies entered South Korea under the command of American General Douglas Murphy. The UN forces not only liberated South Korea completely, but also captured the capital of Pyongyang by entering North Korea. But friends, at that time America had to deal with an enemy which it had not imagined till now. This enemy was China. Friends, America considered the Chinese ruler Chiang Kai-shek as its friend and historian. But a year before the Korean War, a revolution had already taken place in China. China's communist leader Mao Zedong had taken control of China by overthrowing the American ally Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek had fled to Taiwan and had established his rule on this small island. America wanted to end his rule. It accepted the legitimate rule of China, and it had also given China ceding the Uno to Taiwan. But the issue was that Chiang Kai-shek's rule was no longer of any use to America. It was not capable of any military help. On the other hand, Chinese leader Mao had stood up against America with his full military might. He first warned America to leave North Korea. When America did not agree, then in mid-September 1950, Chinese forces started entering North Korea. They started fighting against America and its enemies. China's attack proved to be very surprising and devastating for America. The Chinese forces not only destroyed the capital of North Korea, but also destroyed the country. The spiritual leader of Catholics, Pope Francis XII, also appealed to abolish the death penalty. But on June 19, 1953, both of them were executed by sitting them on electric chairs in a New York prison. Foiz and Foiz's famous Zamana Nazim Hamjo Tariq was written in the context of the death penalty of this couple who were killed on the roads. Friends, this was a time when Mickham was also on the throne in America. This name was given to a Senator Joseph McCarty. He was a staunch enemy of communism. He had started taking action against people working in every department of America by accusing them of being communists. Because of Mr. Carthage, thousands of employees were fired from their jobs. Even the polio vaccine was named as a communist conspiracy. Even Charlie Chaplin, a superstar, had to face the accusation of betrayal and had to leave America and come back to Europe. What were the accusations against Mr. Carthage and his colleagues? What was its actual connection with the Rosenberg case? We have made a separate video on all this. You can also watch it. Then you must watch our video on the scientist in Manhattan Project who made the atomic bomb. Anyway, friends, Russia had made the atomic bomb by hacking the American drawings or by any other means. It did not just make the atomic bomb, but also open a new army against America. That army was an attempt to forcefully include Europe in the communist bloc. 1948 and 1948 Russia caused a communist revolution in the European country Czechoslovakia. As a result of this revolution, Czechoslovakia was cut off from the rest of Europe and became a part of Soviet Russia. After the Soviet Russia took another step and blockaded the central city of Germany, Berlin. Now, we know that after the Second World War, Germany was divided into two parts, i.e. Eastern and Western Germany. Eastern Germany was occupied by Russia, and Western Germany was under control of America, Britain, and France. Similarly, the central city of Germany, Berlin, was also divided into two parts. The western part was under control of Western powers, and the eastern part. The eastern part was under control of Russia. But the issue was that the entire Berlin city was in East Germany, in Russian-controlled Germany. Therefore, its western part was actually surrounded by Soviet Russia. Russia did that. By blockading the city, it was stopped from the supply of all kinds of goods, i.e. West Berlin became famous. The reason for this blockade was that Russia wanted to unite West Germany and East Germany and make a communist Germany. But America and its allies started the process of making West Germany a separate country. For this country, they also issued a new currency, Deutsche Mark, whose value was better than the old German currency. Russia was against the establishment of West Germany and the new currency. Therefore, to teach the Allies a lesson, it blocked West Berlin. America and its allies immediately sent food and fuel, etc., to the city through air, which kept the wheel of life moving there. Russia did not stop this airlift, so that there is no unnecessary confrontation with America. This blockade continued from June 1948 to May 1949. After this, the blockade ended, but the Soviet Russia's influence in Germany continued. The campaign continued. In 1961, Soviet Russia built a wall between the east and west of Berlin and surrounded the rest of the west with a wire. The events of Berlin and Czechoslovakia had made Soviet Russia a big threat to the American bloc. It had become necessary for the U.S. to form a big military alliance to counter this threat. So, on April 4th, 1949, when the blockade of Berlin was still going on, 12 representatives of the MUMA gathered in Washington, D.C. These representatives signed an agreement which is now called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO in short. Apart from the U.S., this organization included Britain, France, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Canada, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Later, its membership kept increasing, and today it has 31 members each. All these members, MUMA, decided that one of these, but if Russia attacks, then the entire world will be imagined as an attack. It was a joint defense and military success. Through this, it had stopped the path of communism in Europe. But America was still looking for new allies to give a tough fight to America. In Europe, it formed its own military organization in the name of Versailles Pact in 1955. This organization included Soviet Russia and its allies in Europe. The hottest part of the Cold War was Asia, where the first proper battle of the Cold War was fought. This war was the Korean War. Friends, the background of this war was that after the Second World War, like Germany, Korea was also divided into two parts. In South Korea, there was an American-backed government, while in North Korea, there was a Russian-backed communist government. A border line was drawn between the two parts, which was called the 38th parallel. Northern Korea was divided into two parts. This line was abolished, and South Korea was also captured. On June 25, 1955, 135,000 troops of North Korea attacked South Korea. In this attack, it had the full military support of Soviet Russia. This attack was so fast that the army of North Korea had captured the capital of South Korea in just 3 days. The Korean War once again started a war against the global order of America. U.S. President Harry Truman declared that if we do not help South Korea, then Russia will keep on capturing one area after another. Therefore, America started retaliatory action and also used the Security Council of the People. On June 27th, the UN Security Council approved an agreement under American pressure. In the agreement, all the members of the government were told that they should help South Korea in every way to foil the attack of North Korea. That is, America and its allies should on November 20th, 1946, the United States got permission to take military action against North Korea. Soviet Russia had boycotted the meeting, so it could not sign the agreement. Now the Army of America and its allies entered South Korea under the command of American General Douglas Murphy. The UN forces not only liberated South Korea completely, but also captured the capital of Pyongyang by entering North Korea. But friends, at that time America had to deal with an enemy which it had not imagined till now. This enemy was China. Friends, America considered the Chinese ruler Chiang Kai-shek as its friend and historian. But a year before the Korean War, a revolution had already taken place in China. China's communist leader Mao Zedong had taken control of China by overthrowing the American ally Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek had fled to Taiwan and had established his rule on this small island. America wanted to end his rule. It accepted the legitimate rule of China, and it had also given China ceding the Uno to Taiwan. But the issue was that Chiang Kai-shek's rule was no longer of any use to America. It was not capable of any military help. On the other hand, Chinese leader Mao had stood up against America with his full military might. He first warned America to leave North Korea. When America did not agree, then in mid-September 1950, Chinese forces started entering North Korea. They started fighting against America and its enemies. China's attack proved to be very surprising and devastating for America. The Chinese forces not only destroyed the capital of North Korea, but also destroyed the country.
The spiritual leader of Catholics, Pope Francis XII, also appealed to abolish the death penalty, but on June 19, 1953, both of them were executed by sitting them on electric chairs in a New York prison. Faiz and Faiz's famous Zamana Nazam Hum Jo Tariq was written in the context of the death penalty of this couple who were killed on the roads. Friends, this was the time when Mickham was also on the throne in America. This name was given to a Senator Joseph McCarty. He was a staunch enemy of communism. He had started taking action against people working in every department of America by accusing them of being communists. Because of Mr. Carthage, thousands of employees were fired from their jobs. Even the polio vaccine was named as a communist conspiracy. Even Charlie Chaplin, a superstar, had to face the accusation of betrayal and had to leave America and come back to Europe. What were the accusations against Mr. Carthage and his colleagues? What was its actual connection with the Rosenberg case? We have made a separate video on all this. You can also watch it. Then you must watch our video on the scientist and Manhattan Project who made the atomic bomb. Anyway, friends, Russia had made the atomic bomb by hacking the American drawings, or by any other means. It did not just make the atomic bomb, but also opened a new army against America. That army was an attempt to forcefully include Europe in the communist bloc. In 1948, Russia caused a communist revolution in the European country Czechoslovakia. As a result of this revolution, Czechoslovakia was cut off from the rest of Europe and became a part of Soviet Russia. After this, Soviet Russia took another step and blockaded the central city of Germany, Berlin. Now we know that after the Second World War, Germany was divided into two parts, i.e. Eastern and Western Germany. Eastern Germany was occupied by Russia and Western Germany was under the control of America, Britain, and France. Similarly, the central city of Germany, Berlin, was also divided into two parts. The western part was under the control of Western powers, and the eastern part. The eastern part was under the control of Russia. But the issue was that the entire Berlin city was in East Germany, in Russian-controlled Germany. Therefore, its western part was actually surrounded by Soviet Russia. Russia did that. By blockading the city, it was stopped from the supply of all kinds of goods, i.e. West Berlin became famous. The reason for this blockade was that Russia wanted to unite West Germany and East Germany and make a communist Germany, but America and its allies started the process of making West Germany a separate country. For this country, they also issued a new currency, Deutsche Mark, whose value was better than the old German currency. Russia was against the establishment of West Germany and the new currency. Therefore, to teach the Allies a lesson, it blocked West Berlin. America and its allies immediately sent food and fuel etc. to this city through air, which kept the wheel of life moving there. Russia did not stop this airlift, so that there is no unnecessary confrontation with America. This blockade continued from June 1948 to May 1949. After this, the blockade ended, but the Soviet Russia's influence in Germany continued. The campaign continued. In 1961, Soviet Russia built a wall between the east and west of Berlin and surrounded the rest of the west with a wire. The events of Berlin and Czechoslovakia had made Soviet Russia a big threat to the American bloc. It had become necessary for the U.S. to form a big military alliance to counter this threat. So, on April 4, 1949, when the blockade of Berlin was still going on, 12 representatives of the MUMA gathered in Washington, D.C. These representatives signed an agreement which is now called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO in short. Apart from the U.S., this organization included Britain, France, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Canada, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Later, its membership kept increasing, and today it has 31 members each. All these members MUMA decided that one of these, but if Russia attacks, then the entire world will be imagined as an attack. It was a joint defense and military success. Through this, it had stopped the path of communism in Europe. But America was still looking for new allies to give a tough fight to America. In Europe, it formed its own military organization in the name of Versailles Pact in 1955. This organization included Soviet Russia and its allies in Europe. The hottest part of the Cold War was Asia, where the first proper battle of the Cold War was fought. This war was the Korean War. Friends, the background of this war was that after the Second World War, like Germany, Korea was also divided into two parts. In South Korea, there was an American-backed government, while in North Korea, there was a Russian-backed communist government. A borderline was drawn between the two parts, which was called the 38th parallel. Northern Korea was divided into two parts. This line was abolished, and South Korea was also captured. On June 25, 1955, 135,000 troops of North Korea attacked South Korea. In this attack, it had the full military support of Soviet Russia. This attack was so fast that the army of North Korea had captured the capital of South Korea in just 3 days. The Korean War once again started a war against the global order of America. U.S. President Harry Truman declared that if we do not help South Korea, then Russia will keep on capturing one area after another. Therefore, America started retaliatory action and also used the Security Council of the People. On June 27, the UN Security Council approved an agreement under American pressure. In the agreement, all the members of the government were told that they should help South Korea in every way to foil the attack of North Korea, that is, America and its allies should. On November 20, 1946, the United States got permission to take military action against North Korea. Soviet Russia had boycotted the meeting, so it could not sign the agreement. Now the Army of America and its allies entered South Korea under the command of American General Douglas Murphy. The UN forces not only liberated South Korea completely, but also captured the capital of Pyongyang by entering North Korea. But friends, at that time America had to deal with an enemy which it had not imagined till now. This enemy was China. Friends, America considered the Chinese ruler Chiang Kai-shek as its friend and historian, but a year before the Korean War, a revolution had already taken place in China. China's communist leader Mao Zedong had taken control of China by overthrowing the American ally Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek had fled to Taiwan and had established his rule on this small island. America wanted to end his rule. It accepted the legitimate rule of China, and it had also given China's seat in the UNO to Taiwan, but the issue was that Chiang Kai-shek's rule was no longer of any use to America. It was not capable of any military help. On the other hand, Chinese leader Mao had stood up against America with his full military might. He first warned America to leave North Korea. When America did not agree, then in mid-September 1950, Chinese forces started entering North Korea. They started fighting against America and its enemies. China's attack proved to be very surprising and devastating for America. The Chinese forces not only destroyed the capital of North Korea, but also destroyed the country. Not only did they liberate the Pyongyang government, but also captured the capital of South Korea, Seoul. This was the first time in American history that an enemy had gathered Uncle Sam's teeth in this way. This situation was also very dangerous for America's world power status. America's frustration was at such a level that American President Ray Truman threatened to drop an atom bomb on the Chinese forces in Korea. In response, Mao also warned America that the talk of an atomic attack could start the Third World War. However, no global war came to pass. In March 1951, the American Army started a new military operation by the name of Operation Reaper. After a month of tough fighting, the American Army succeeded in capturing Seoul again on April 4th next month. The Chinese forces were pushed back to North Korea. On July 27, 1953, this war ended on these very lines. Friends, in this war, 36,000 American soldiers were killed. Soldiers were killed while more than 1 lakh were injured. However, China had to bear much more casualties. At least 1.5 lakh soldiers were killed. But this war was a stalemate in which America could not get a victory. It was successful in liberating South Korea. Friends, the complete story of the war has been covered in this episode of The War of China. You can watch it after this video. Well, friends, America had successfully protected South Korea, but now its war with Soviet Russia to make dangerous weapons and space race had started. This was such a race that once again made the whole world face the danger of nuclear war. Like the political and military field, America had the upper hand in the arms race from the very beginning. On November 15, 1952, America conducted the first experiment of hydrogen bomb inside Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. This bomb was named Ivy Mike. A huge cloud arose from this explosion. It rose to a height of 120,000 feet and spread over an area of 60 miles. The power of this bomb was 700 times more than the Toming bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 3 years later, in 1955, Russia also successfully experimented with the hydrogen bomb. Both the superpowers also started working on nuclear weapons and missiles. The first milestone in this field was also achieved by America. America launched the world's first nuclear submarine USS Teleus in 1954, while Russia developed the first nuclear submarine K-3 3 years later in 1957. Russia could not make nuclear weapons quickly, but it definitely defeated America temporarily in nuclear missiles. In 1957, Soviet Russia launched its first intercontinental missile. The name of this missile was R-7 Simo. Its range was about 8,800 kilometers. 2 years later, in 1959, America also launched its first intercontinental missile Atlas. Its range was also 8,850 kilometers. That means the range of both was almost equal. But despite making Atlas, Americans felt that they were lagging behind Russia in the technology race. The reason for this was that by that time Russians were far ahead in the space race. Russia launched a satellite Sputnik 1 in space on October 4, 1957. This was the world's first satellite. It kept revolving in space for many months. It also sent radio signals from space to the ground. In comparison to this, America also launched its first satellite Explorer 1 in 1958. Americans claimed that this satellite was better than Russia's. But obviously the credit for making the first satellite and the first intercontinental missile went to Russia. This was a matter of great pride for American ego. In the improving elections of 1960, this had become a big issue. Democratic candidate John F. Kennedy, the then president, had made a big statement against the U.S. Eisenhower was accused of not doing anything for the betterment of the missile program. He promised the American people that he would improve the missile program of America after becoming the president. He got votes on this promise and became the President of America in 1961. After taking the oath of president in 1961, he accelerated the missile program of America, but it also had a side effect, and that was that the arms race between America and Soviet Russia made the American country very unsafe. In the 50s and 60s, atomic bomb-proof shelters started appearing in America. These shelters were marketed thoroughly. Apart from this, underground shelters were also being built under the houses. Civil defense programs were also started to protect the surface of the earth from atomic bombs. Drills were conducted for the children in schools that as soon as there is an atomic attack, they should hide under the benches. The common people were also advised to lie down on the ground immediately at the time of the explosion. In an animation, instructions were being issued to the citizens that in case of an explosion, they should park their cars on the side of the road to make way for rescue workers and switch off all the electricity and gas appliances in their homes. The windows and doors were closed, and people were kept in the basement. Refuges or fallout shelters were also established in the rooms of some government buildings and underground subway stations. Food and other items were also stored in large quantities here. In New York City, 18,000 people could hide in these shelters. The city's most famous building, the Empire State Building and the World Trade Center, which was destroyed in 9/11, were also declared fallout shelters. The American government also built several underground tunnels and nuclear bunkers separately so that the American president and the Congress of the United States could remain safe from attacks. Some such bunkers are still in use today, such as the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in the American state of Pennsylvania, which has nuclear bunkers. Apart from this, some nuclear bunkers have now been opened to the public. For example, this secret bunker built in the American state of West Virginia, on top of which the resort the Greenbrier is built, many people have been able to hide in these shelters. Even at that time, it was believed that both superpowers have nuclear weapons, so there will not be a big war. You can guess this from the cartoon printed in this newspaper in which big missiles are seen near both the MUMA, but it is written on both that these weapons will not be fired because then the other side will also give the same reply. So the soldiers of both the sides are throwing arrows at each other, but the danger was there anyway. So in 1962, a moment came when it seemed that the nuclear weapons have been fired now. Now this sentence is remembered today as the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, Cuba was the union of Soviet Russia. The coast of Cuba was just 161 kilometers away from the American state of Florida. 161 kilometers away, Russia started to secretly attack Cuba with its nuclear missiles. These were ASF missiles whose maximum range was 2,500 kilometers. This meant that from here, many important American cities, including the American capital Washington, D.C. and New York City, were within the immediate range of Russian missiles. They used to come in range, i.e. Russia had brought the Cold War to the doorstep of America. But what happened was that the Americans soon came to know about this secret program. On October 14, 1962, an American spy, Tyre, saw a missile site. After this, when they did further surveillance of Cuba, they discovered at least 42 missile sites. This information created a stir in America. The intelligence briefed American President John F. Kennedy about this. On October 22, President Kennedy informed him about the presence of missiles in Cuba in his address to the American community on TV. Along with this, he announced the blockade of Cuba. On his orders, the American Navy surrounded Cuba. During this, 25 Russian ships, which were bringing further missiles, also stopped some distance away from the American blockade line. Thus, a standoff took place between the two superpowers. Now it seemed that the nuclear war was just around the corner. During this, an important incident happened that on October 27, the Cuban forces launched a nuclear war. The American spy was killed. The pilot Rudolph Andres was killed. On this, America planned to attack Cuba, and American ground forces were also gathered in Florida for the attack. On the other hand, another incident happened that an American submarine collided with the Russian nuclear submarine B-59 near Cuba. The submarine was at the bottom of the sea. The American ship dropped some dummy bombs in the sea as a warning. Its captain thought that they had been attacked. He immediately ordered to prepare nuclear missiles for a counterattack. The captain's second-in-command pacified him and handled the situation. There was no need for an atomic war. Along with these war preparations, secret talks were also going on between Washington and Russia. President Kennedy and Russian Soviet leader Kosovo both realized that the matter should not go towards nuclear war. Therefore, they also promised to remove the American missiles from Turkey. This way, the threat of nuclear war was averted. For many years, the world remained in a state of disarray, and nuclear weapons were used many times. But friends, America of the 50s and 60s was not only busy in nuclear and space race, but it was also progressing rapidly. New houses and housing schemes were being built in America at a rapid pace. In 1950, a record 13 million houses were built in America. After the World War, America had also become the #1 country in the world in the production of cars. Every day, 20,000 cars were being manufactured. Within 10 years, 75% of American families had bought their own cars. In 1965, every sixth American was working in the car industry. In 1965, American car plants had manufactured 11 million cars, trucks, and buses. With the progress of America, the pace of its population growth had also increased very fast. Every hour, 330 children were being born. This generation was named as baby boomers. According to an estimate, from 1946 to 1964, American couples gave birth to 7.60 crore children. Friends, America was progressing, but a social issue was hollowing it from inside. This issue was that black families were not getting equal rights. The oppression of white families on black families. This was the same period in which Martin Luther King's words, "I have a dream," got a lot of fame. How did this civil rights movement for the rights of white families become successful in America? How did the political fight decide that America would not be a liberal country of only white families, but of all people? In this, we will show you how America reached the moon. But when the next installment of History of America ended and the black farm slaves were freed, a new group of white racists emerged. This group named itself Ku Klux Klan, or KKK in short. People of this group used to wear white clothes up to their feet to hide their identity. They used to wear white robes and a white pointed hood on their head, due to which only their eyes were visible. The ideology of this group was that America belongs only to white Americans because, according to them, it was the white Americans who had built this country. The black people, for whom the term of colored people was also used, did not have any right over America. In their opinion, KKK secretly attacked the black population and their supporting white liberals in America for years. In the decade of 1920, these people started coming out openly. They even stopped hiding their faces and started marching in the capital of government, Washington, D.C. The ideology of this group spread so fast in America that the American community was divided into two parts. On one side, the white race was present, and on the other side, the black race and the liberals fighting for their rights. Now, this was the issue which weakened the rapidly progressing America after the Second World War. Now, these two groups are in a dilemma. It had to be decided whether America would become a multicultural liberal nation or a racist America state. This issue could have led America to a new civil war. What were the rules of this conflict in American history? Who fought them, and how did America reach the moon? I am Faisal Rise. Listen and know that in the fourth installment of the History of America series Season 3, we will show you all this, friends. In the post-Civil War American society, the ideology of KKK had racial discrimination. Suffragists were not considered equal human beings. In these states, the flag of the Civil War era, i.e. the Confederations, which was a symbol of racism, was waved openly. In the American state of South Carolina, it waved on the central government building till the year 2000. These same southern states had made Jim Crow laws against the white people. What were these laws? Friends, this term was coined by a famous white American actor, Thomas Marth, in the 1830s. He had invented the song as he had heard an old black man singing a song. The lyrics of the song were "Jump Jim Crow." What Darth Mirth did was to give this song the form of a character. He would paint his face black and become a black man. He would wear strange clothes and act like a masked man and start singing Jump Jim Crow. In this way, his racist white audience would get happy and clap. This character and song became so famous that it was used on stage across America and then in movies after independence. In an animation film Dumbo made by Disney in 1941, a crow was named Jim Crow. Gradually, Jim Crow became a term that was used to prove black people stupid. Later, this term started being used for those crows that were made by different American states against blacks under the KKK mentality. That is, it was not a government official term. Jim Crow laws had two strict restrictions. 1. Blacks could not sit in public seats with whites. 2. They had to pay a hefty fee and pay an education test to vote. The result of Jim Crow law was that black forms and white forms were distributed in every aspect of life. In every building, separate doors were made for the entry of black forms and white forms. There were separate waiting rooms for black forms and white forms at railway stations. They even had a separate place to drink water. Black forms could not even buy houses in white areas. Their theaters and schools were also separate. The freedom that Abraham Lincoln had given to the black forms had become a joke in the presence of Jim Crow law. By the time the 1950s and 60s came, a century had passed, and now the patience of the black forms facing Jim Crow law had also been exhausted. On December 1955, the anger of 100 years burst like lava. The anger of a century burst like lava. It started with a small sentence. It happened that in the capital of the American state of Alabama, Rosa Parks, a white woman, boarded a bus in Montgomery. She sat on a seat in that part of the bus which was reserved for white people. After some time, a white man came in the bus, and the driver asked Rosa to vacate the seat for him. Rosa refused. The driver called the police, and Rosa was arrested. This incident resulted in the white population of the city getting stunned. The leader of the white people, Martin Luther King Jr., announced the boycott of buses on this occasion. Friends should know about Martin Luther King that he was born on January 5, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, and was a member of the Baptist Church, which is a small sect of Protestantism. Martin Luther King was very influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. He believed in Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence. He also formed a civil rights group by the name of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. Martin Luther King's leadership after the Rosa Parks incident in 1956, Rosa Parks started a massive campaign against Jim Crow law and KKK mentality across America. This campaign is considered to be the biggest civil rights movement in American history. The first phase of the civil rights movement proved to be very easy, so in the end, the black workers boycotted the buses and started traveling on foot. For a year, the buses kept running empty in the city, and the transporters went bankrupt. They agreed that now no white worker would remove a black worker from the bus seat. December 21, 1956 was the historic day when Rosa Parks once again sat in the same part of a bus where she was jailed for sitting. An important milestone in the civil rights movement had been achieved. The bus in which she was arrested is still preserved in the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan. This success made Rosa Parks a hero of the Americans. Years later, American President Bill Clinton also gave her the Presidential Medal for Freedom, while America's first President Barack Obama also gave her the Presidential Medal for Freedom. Obama also sat in this historic bus as a hapless man. So, friends, the civil rights movement had put the first big crack in the strong wall of racism by running a successful movement against the transporters. The next year after the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, on May 17, 1957, a very big gathering was held at the Lincoln Memorial near the White House in Washington, D.C. Martin Luther King addressed this gathering and demanded from the then President Eisenhower that he should give equal rights to the black firms. But friends, Eisenhower was probably afraid of his white voters. He did not fulfill this demand. On this, the blacks and their supporting white students started giving a new angle to the civil rights movement. That is, white and black students started going to departmental stores and sitting at the counters of white firms during lunchtime. The center of this change was the city of Atlanta in the state of Georgia. Georgia was the southern state where Jim Crow laws were very strict. When all this started happening, the government swung into action to crush it. Tijagi Talba was arrested on a large scale. Martin Luther King was also arrested from a lunch counter. The racists also started throwing food on the protesters sitting on the counters. At many places, the protesters were badly beaten up. But this movement did not stop. It spread to many other cities besides Atlanta. Eventually, the store owners also surrendered and separate counters for white firms were abolished. This was the second deep blow on the wall of racism. All this was achieved through nonviolence. But Martin Luther King did not know that his nonviolence movement would soon face the wrath of the racist princely governments and white firms. When they saw the success of the civil rights movement, they came out in the field with full force. The police and paramilitary forces started being used extensively against the Christian firms. The police used water cannons on the white firms and started lathi charge. In Birmingham, Alabama, many dogs were let loose on the protesters. Thousands of people were sent to jail. After the arrest of the adults in Birmingham, children came out on the streets to protest. These protesters were named Children's Corpses, i.e., the Crusade of the Children. But the police snatched the Tijagi posters from these children and arrested them in large numbers and put them in jail. Along with the police, the white supporters also started attacking the civil rights movement. On May 10, 1963, a bomb attack was carried out on the headquarters of the civil rights movement, AG Guest and Motel. 4 people were injured in this attack. Similarly, on September 15th, 4 white girls were killed in a bomb attack on a church. During the civil rights movement, there was also a movement of freedom riders. These were the white and white students who rented buses and started a long journey in America. They would stop at every stop and sit in the waiting room for the white men. For this, racists made him a target of violence many times, and some of his buses were also burnt. The racists did not even forgive the leader of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King. Once a bomb was thrown at his house in Mathura. He was not present at home, so he remained safe. The police arrested him many times. His legs were tied with chains. He was kept imprisoned in dark rooms. Once after his arrest, a dog was made to sit with him in his car to harass him. To prove that he was a communist, a board was put up in public, in which he was ostensibly shown sitting in a communist training session. He was accused of being a communist, but till date no evidence has been found that he was an agent of the communists or their lord, or that he had any connection with them. Once when he was present in a church in Mathura, racists even pelted stones at him. Martin Luther and his companions, kept humming only one song, hum kamyab. The crowd that was pelting stones got tired and left on their own after some time. In 1964, near the American city of Philadelphia, members of the KKK kidnapped 3 civil rights activists, 2 of whom were white men. They were murdered and their bodies were buried in a dam. Their car was also badly burnt. Friends, looking at these fights, it seemed that America was heading towards a new civil war on the issue of black men. Even before the American Civil War of 1861, similar fights had taken place for and against slavery, but the difference was that when the Civil War took place in the 19th century, at that time the American states were very powerful. Every state had its own militia force, and the federal government, which was the central government, needed the help of the states to gather the army. But 100 years later, in 1960, in the 20th century, the situation had changed. Now the central government of America had the federal militia. The government had the most powerful army in the world, whereas the states did not have the strength to fight against this army, and this federal government, the central government of America, was not with Jim Crow. It was not against the black farms. This was the reason that all the states with Jim Crow ideology became helpless one by one in front of the civil rights movement. Even the racists could not resist for long, and one by one the links of Jim Crow ideology started breaking. The strong wall of racist ideology started falling in America. It was the day of August 28, 1963, and a sea of 2.5 lakh Americans was present in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Martin Luther started his speech, but he could not complete it because suddenly the voice of American Golkara and Luther's close friend Mahalia Jackson rose from the sky. She said, "First tell the people about your dream." On hearing these words, Martin Luther said, "I have a dream. It is my dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the former slaves will be freed from slavery. Children and children of former masters will come together, and there will be brotherhood among them. One day, all my 4 children will be recognized not by their color, but by their character. These words of Martin Luther became immortal in history. Within a year of this speech, the civil rights movement forced the federal government to make an important law. July 2, 1964 became a memorable day in the history of American civil rights. On this day, American President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Bill of Civil Rights approved by the Congress. Martin Luther King was also present in this ceremony. The president also shook hands with him after signing the bill. The first important point of the Civil Rights Act was that black farmers will not be separated from white farmers, i.e. no discrimination. The second important point was that they will be given jobs on the basis of merit, on the basis of ability, and not by color. As a result of this act, black children started studying in white-firm schools. Whites and blacks started eating in the same restaurants. There was one thing missing in this law. The whites had not yet got the right to vote. Now the whites started protesting for voting rights. The center of these protests once again became the state of Alabama, where the bus boycott had taken place 10 years ago. The governor of Alabama, George Wells, was a staunch racist and used to bring the racist flag of the whites of the southern states to his rallies during the Civil War. He issued orders to crush the protests of the whites with force. The police and paramilitary forces started strict actions throughout the state. The height of racist flag was such that this flag was on the license plates of police vehicles and on the helmets of the Confederacy. On February 18th, a security force killed whites activist Jimley Jackson. Similarly, on March 11th, a whites activist James Rabe, who was against racism, was also killed by the KKK. When the members were beaten up by violence, we kept protesting for the voting rights of the protesters. On March 7th, the protesters marched from Selma City towards Montgomery, the capital of Alabama. On the way, the army and the police in horse riding blocked the route of the march at Adams Bridge in Mount Alabama. There were severe clashes between the protesters and the police. Dozens of protesters were injured, and many were arrested due to police shelling and laఠīcharge. A protester leader, Amalia Bunton, fainted due to police violence. The police threw her on the roadside. This day is remembered in American history as Bloody Sunday. The picture of this violence tarnished the image of America all over the world. President Lyndon Johnson addressed the nation on TV and condemned the violence. He also advised the Congress to pass an act for voting rights. The president also allowed the protesters to march till Montgomery. The U.S. Congress started working on the Voting Rights Act. This act was also approved by the Congress in July 1965, and on August 6, 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. Martin Luther King was again invited to this signing ceremony. Under this act, Sia FAMU was allowed to become a voter, like the whites, without any condition. Friends, 1965 was the year when 100 years of the American Civil War and the end of slavery were completed. In the same year, Sia FAMU got the right to vote. It was a very big milestone for Sia FAMU to get the right to vote. Gym class. Finally, friends, the credit for the success of the civil rights movement goes to Martin Luther King. The racist class that Abraham Lincoln had defeated in a war 100 years ago was defeated again by Martin Luther through nonviolence. Jim Crow law was abolished not by sword, but by pen, and through the Pure March. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize a year before for leading this movement, but friends, Martin Luther King had to pay the price of this success in the form of his life. On April 4, 1968, a racist, Jermaine Ray, shot him dead. Just like Abraham Lincoln, who freed the Christians from slavery, was killed, Martin Luther King, who got them their rights, was also put to death. His murderer was arrested and sentenced to 9,999 years in prison and was released from jail in 1998. Friends, you should also know that he became a black man, but the white Muslims, who loved racism, kept up a full-fledged campaign against him. They were not ready to give up racism under any circumstances. They said that we also have civil rights, and that is that we should be kept away from the whites. These people used to take out processions and say that stay away from such and such area because Negroes and whites are mixing here. Many racists were accusing that the demand for a school for whites and whites is a communist conspiracy. Many whites were even running a campaign to get whites fired from their jobs. The students of white schools also used to protest that whites' children should not be allowed to take admission in their schools under any circumstances. When white students went to the schools, the white Muslims used to abuse them. The white Muslims strictly stopped whites from taking admission in any place of their choice. Some whites went to bathe in the swimming pool of a hotel in Florida, and they were forcibly taken out and handed over to the police. At another place in Florida, when some prostitutes jumped into a swimming pool as a protest, the manager threw water into the pool. While doing this, he shouted that he was purifying the swimming pool. Anyway, the people of the pool passed by safely and no one was harmed. At a beach in Florida also, when prostitutes tried to swim in the sea, racists blocked their way. The prostitutes were beaten up. The white women also kicked the white women who supported the prostitutes. Here, the police brought the situation under control by lathi charge. Anyway, with time, all these fights and incidents stopped, and today in America, the black and white are living together, which means that America has taken the form of a multicultural liberal society. Friends, the Ku Klux Klan or KKK mentality and groups have not ended. Even today, there are many racially dominant groups in America who call themselves KKK. They also want to identify their status by their special attire. However, now they are not as powerful and violent as before. This is the same class which has lost twice in the last 150 years, but is still looking for an opportunity to re-establish its grip on America. Friends, just like Martin Luther King had dreamt of the rights of blacks, similarly, this dream was also of American President John F. Kennedy. This was the dream of taking America to the moon, and then bringing it back. He had announced the moon mission in 1961 itself. He had promised that he would land a man on the moon by the end of 1960. He had to do this work before Soviet Russia, because with this, America's space race was in full swing. You have already known in the previous episode that Soviet Russia had a berth in this race because it had sent the world's first satellite Space One to LA. But in 1960, Russia took a step towards another milestone. It started preparations to send a human into space. The space race was now going to enter the next level. On April 12, 1961, human history took a new step. Soviet Russia sent the first human into space. This was a 27-year-old Russian Air Force pilot Yuri Gagarin. He was made to lie in a space capsule in such a way that you can see on the screen. This space capsule went into the atmosphere and separated from the rocket. Yuri Gagarin orbited around the Earth in space for 1 hour 48 minutes. This achievement of Soviet Russia forced America to respond. Next month, on May 5th, American astronaut Alan Shepard reached space, sitting in the spacecraft Freedom Sails. He remained in space for 15 minutes. This was the highest achievement in comparison to Russia. The achievement was less, but America had given the message that it was not ready to retreat from the space race. The next milestone in the space race was for a person to come out of the spacecraft and spend time in space. In this race, too, the Soviets and Russians won. On March 18, 1965, under the Russian space mission Hoth-2, the Russian space hawk Alexei Novo came out of his spacecraft and entered space. He was tied to the spacecraft with a 175 feet long cable. He spent 12 minutes in space and came back to the spacecraft. Now it had become necessary for America to respond to this. On June 3rd, America also sent the Jumna 4 mission into space. In this, the American space hawk Edward H. White was sitting. He tied himself with a 25 feet long cable and spent 23 minutes in space. That is, he spent more time in space than the Russians. Now, friends, it was the turn of the third and most important milestone in the space race. Now, both the superpowers had their eyes on the moon, and it was understood that the moon would be the first space hawk. The one who reaches the moon first is the biggest victory in the space race. Then Russia got the first chance. On February 3rd, 1966, the Russian Luna 9 mission landed on the surface of the moon. It was an unmanned mission, that is, there was no human on board. This mission sent a lot of lunar data to the ground. In response, America also landed the Surveyor 1 mission on the moon on June 2, 1966. Both the superpowers were not far behind each other till this point. But the real competition was not this, it was about who would land a human on the moon and bring it back. In this competition, America had a great desire that it should not let Soviet Russia win in any way. The situation was that the moon landing programs of America and Soviet Russia were competing. In Russia, the human moon landing program was named N1A3, while the American program was running under the code name of the Greek sun god Apollo. America started practicing to land a human on the moon in 1967 before Russia, but in the beginning itself, there was a problem. A tragedy occurred which put the entire Apollo project in danger. The public had now started becoming enemies of this mission. On January 27, 1967, the test flight of Apollo and the mission was being conducted suddenly. A short circuit caused a fire in the spacecraft, an explosion occurred, and all the 3 astronauts sitting in it were killed. Among them was the first American astronaut Edward H. White to do a spacewalk. Apollo 1 mission had failed. On one hand, it was a tragedy for America. On the other hand, Soviet Russia's space program was also falling prey to problems. On February 21, 1969, a Russian rocket exploded during a test flight. This project also became a failure. It was not long before America recovered from this loss despite the failure of Apollo 1. During November 67 to October 68, 3 test flights of America were successful. The most successful mission was Apollo 7, which was sent into space on October 11, 1968. It had 3 astronauts who orbited the Earth for 11 days. On May 18, 1969, Apollo 10 mission went into space with 3 astronauts and a lunar module. This mission reached 15.6 kilometers from the surface of the moon. 15. It passed 6 kilometers above. This was a very important mission because it had to be seen whether the moon vehicle could land on the surface of the moon and reach back to its rocket in space in orbit. It may happen that the Apollo 10 mission successfully landed the moon vehicle on the moon and was also successful in bringing it back to the rocket. The extremely important final test mission was successful. Now America was ready to land a man on the moon. Friends, the American astronauts started practicing moon landing in the Western Sahara region of America, whose soil was a little similar to the soil of the moon. Native Americans also lived in this area. From here, an interesting legend became famous. It happened that one day the astronauts met an old Native American. He asked, "What are you doing here?" The astronauts replied that we are practicing to land on the moon. "We are going to the moon." He said, "Okay, when you go to the moon, our Holy Spirit will meet you there. If you meet them, give them a message from me." Then he made the astronauts memorize a sentence in his tribal language. When the astronauts asked its meaning, the old man said, "I cannot tell you, this is our and Holy Spirit's secret. It will remain a secret, we cannot tell you, you just memorize it and tell them." The astronauts were also very curious and were very surprised that what has he made us remember. They found a translator and told him this sentence. Then the translator laughed a lot and said that the old man has sent a message to the spirits that whatever these people coming to you say, do not believe even a single word of theirs, just understand that these people have come to snatch your land. Friends, you have come to know in History of America Season 1 that how America was created by snatching the land of Native Americans, so that old man was also warning the spirits of the moon or the people living on the moon. Friends, it is said that there's a legend, but even if it is a legend, then there is a very bitter truth in it. It is hidden. On July 16, 1969, Rocket Satan took off from Kennedy Space Center, Florida, with Apollo 11 mission and its 3 spaceships. These 3 spaceships were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael. After 4 days, on July 20th, that historic moment came when the moon cart, Eagle, along with 2 spaceships, landed on the surface of the moon. This was done 5 hours before the expectations of science. According to American time, at 10:39 p.m., the door of the Eagle opened and Neil Armstrong got down from the ladder attached to the moon cart. A camera attached to the moon cart was sending live videos of this to the ground where crores of people were watching the scene. As soon as Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, he said his famous quote that this is a small step for a human being, but a very big one for humanity. Both of them together hoisted the American flag with 50 stars on the moon. America had won the moon landing race. Soviet Russia was left behind, but here an interesting incident happened. Let me tell you that when the American spaceships were still present on the moon, a Russian mission also reached there. This was an unmanned mission, which was named Luna 15. This mission was to land on the moon and take samples of soil and rocks from there and return to the Earth. But this mission failed and crashed on the moon. Anyway, the American spaceships spent a little more than 21 hours on the surface of the moon. They took samples of soil and rocks and came back to their rocket. From here, their return journey began. Even after this first original landing, America kept sending space missions to Law till 1972. We have already shown you the complete videos of these missions in detail in our Universe series. Friends, Russia also kept trying to land on the moon till 1972. The next year after the American moon landing, in 1970, the Russian unmanned Mission 16 successfully landed on the moon. It took samples of soil and rocks from there and also returned to the Earth successfully. That is, Russia had the capability to send a mission to the moon and bring it back. But no human mission of Russia could ever go to the moon. Russia had also designed a moon vehicle for human landing. The Russian machine was smaller than the American moon vehicle. Still, 2 people could sit in it like Apollo 11. But the problem was that Russia, rocket and other conditions could not be created to send this moon vehicle to the moon. On November 23, 1972, the last Russian rocket also got destroyed during a test flight. This program continued on paper for 4 years, and then in 1976 it was officially closed. Thus, the most important battle of the Cold War, i.e. space race, reached its conclusion with the American victory. Friends, America had won this race, but it was also very expensive for it. It cost $24 billion, which is approximately $100 billion according to today's value. Apart from this, the day and night hard work of 4 lakh engineers, technicians, and scientists was also involved in landing the spacecraft on the moon. Friends, America had won the moon race, but it started facing a lot of defeat in a battle on the ground. This was a war that changed the American nation and its military doctrine forever. This battle was the Vietnam War. We will also show you the story of this war, the most unsuccessful battle in American history. And the story of the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy will also be told, but all this will be told in the next part of the history of America. On November 22, 1963, American President John F. Kennedy was visiting Dallas, a city in Texas. On his route, a sniper was hiding in a 7-story building. He had a car cannon rifle in his hand, which also had a telescope. This gunman was a former American Marine, and his aim was very strong. At 12:30, the convoy of American President John F. Kennedy passed through the road in front of the building. The sniper took aim and opened fire. President's car had gone a little ahead of the building. The first bullet hit his neck from behind and passed through the front of the neck. The second bullet hit Kennedy's head and passed through his skull. He collapsed in the car itself. He was taken to the nearby Parkland Memorial Hospital in a severely injured condition. The wounds were fatal and the doctors could not save his life. At 1 p.m., the doctors admitted President to the hospital. Declared dead, John F. Kennedy was the 4th American president to be assassinated, but the timing of his assassination was very important because a few days before this, America's 3rd president had also been killed. Were both these incidents part of a conspiracy? What war crimes did America commit in Vietnam? How did America suffer its first defeat in history? I am Faisal Uzi, and in the 5th installment of History of America Season 3 of Daiko Suno Jano, we will show you all this, my curious fellows. John F. Kennedy was assassinated at a very important moment of the Cold War. This was the time when America was preparing to attack Vietnam. The incident took place in that region of Southeast Asia, which is called Indochina region. It shared borders with Cambodia, Laos, and China. Vietnam had gained independence from France after the Second World War, but during the freedom struggle itself it had split into 2 parts, northern and southern Vietnam, but had expanded into South Vietnam. Northern Vietnam in 1856, communist leader Ho Chi Minh had established his rule. His capital was No, while the capital of southern Vietnam was Saigon, and it was ruled by President Ngo Dinh Diem. President Nodin was an ally of America. Now the situation was that northern Vietnam wanted to establish a united Vietnam by including its southern part with itself. In this plan, northern Vietnam had full support of China and Russia. Obviously, both these countries understood that a single Vietnam would be a great addition to their communist bloc. On the other hand, America felt that being the so-called free world leader, it was its duty to protect southern Vietnam from becoming a part of the anti-free world, i.e. communist bloc. Hence, America's proxy war with Soviet Russia and China started in Vietnam. In this war, communist guerrillas were fighting on the ground, who used to raid the forces of southern Vietnam. Because they lived in southern Vietnam, but they were from northern Vietnam, and they were the supporters of the communist revolution. Keep in mind that apart from these Viet Congs of northern Vietnam, there was a separate army, which you can call the Army of Northern Vietnam. These warriors, these Viet Congs, had military support from China and Soviet Russia. To counter these two, America started helping the South Vietnam forces with new weapons and military advisors. By 1963, 177,000 military advisors of America had landed in Vietnam. They had also established their military bases there, but they had not yet fully participated in the war. They only used to train the forces of South Vietnam. But the fact was that by the end of 1963, despite American help, South Vietnam was facing defeat. The reason for this was that President Gan used a lot of atrocities on the common people to crush the Vietnamese guerrillas. Due to this, the people started joining the Congress against him. However, this situation in Vietnam was becoming a threat to the American cause. In these circumstances, the American commanders advised President Kennedy to remove President Norton from his post and allow the American army to fight in Vietnam. The president agreed to remove President Norton but refused to send his army to Vietnam for a full-fledged direct action. On November 2, 1963, the American CIA caused a military revolt in Vietnam. President Norton was killed in this, and General Don Van Ming became the ruler in his place. But just 20 days after this incident, President John F. Kennedy was also killed in broad daylight in Texas. His murderer, Lee Harvey Wald, was caught. He was arrested, but he could never tell the story behind the murder because before he could tell it, he was shot in a nightclub at point-blank range in front of cameras. The owner of the Kennedy Group, Jack Ruby, shot him. Later, Jack Ruby also died in jail in 1967, i.e. 4 years later. Thus, President Kennedy's murder remained a mystery. Even today, some Americans believe that President Kennedy was murdered because he was against sending troops to Vietnam. Now, we cannot say whether it was a conspiracy or not, but the fact is that within 2 years after President Kennedy's murder, the American Army's full-fledged deployment in Vietnam had begun. The Army was sent. After my curious fellows, President Kennedy, his deputy President Lyndon B. Johnson took over the presidency. He was anxious to send troops to North Vietnam against his president. However, elections were to be held in 1964. In such a situation, President Johnson did not want to lose public popularity by starting a new war. The element of sympathy that his group and he had received did not go waste. During this time when America was in the thick of elections, its tension with North Vietnam did not end. It kept on increasing. On August 2nd, near the Vietnamese coast, there was a clash between the U.S. Navy and the Vietnamese ships. In this, 1 American ship and 3 Vietnamese ships were damaged. On August 4th, American President Lyndon P. Johnson claimed that another attack had been made on American ships, but let me tell you, friends, that this claim was false. There was no attack on American ships, but based on this false attack, President Johnson ordered fake attacks on the military bases of North Vietnam. In these attacks, at least 25 Vietnamese ships were destroyed. Apart from this, oil depots and military bases were also targeted. After this, President Lyndon B. Johnson got an agreement approved from the Congress. In this agreement, the American president was given the authority to take every necessary action to thwart any attack against the U.S. forces or to stop the ongoing attack. Now, President Johnson had the right to start the war. Legal reply was given. Now they were just waiting for the elections in November. Voting took place on November 3, 1964. Due to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, President Johnson got all the sympathy votes. He won 44 out of 50 American states. On January 20th, 1965, President Johnson took the oath of president. Now he was fully prepared for action in Vietnam, but before America could attack, Vietcong attacked in such a way that Americans were stunned. This Vis-Reese military base that you are seeing was the American base Camp Holloway in Vietnam, where their military advisors were staying. On the morning of February 7th, Vietcong suddenly attacked this base. In this battle, 7 American soldiers were killed and 80 were injured. 15 American soldiers standing at the base and helicopters were also destroyed by Vietnamese guerrillas. Vietcong soldiers could not take much damage. When President Johnson came to know about this, he lost his temper. Congress had already given him the authority to start the war. On the basis of this authority, President Johnson started counterattacks against Vietcong, i.e. the Vietnam War started. The first big operation of this war was Operation Flaming. American forces heavily bombed Vietcong guerrillas in the border areas of North and South Vietnam. The Namibians also killed a few American forces. Next month, in March, America started heavy bombing on North Vietnam in the name of Operation Ruling Thunder. On the first day, 160 forces targeted 2 bases in North Vietnam. In this attack, 6 American forces were also destroyed. After this, on March 8th, 300 American Marines landed on the shores of South Vietnam, and America formally started the ground war. In the first 3 years of the Vietnam War, America had the upper hand. The Americans attacked the South and heavy bombing continued in both North Vietnam and military bases in North Vietnam. Even the settlements and Mahajur camps were targeted. The American Army and the Army of South Vietnam also carried out a lot of ground operations against the Vietcong in the jungles of Vietnam. One of the most important among them was Operation Junction City. This operation was carried out in the Vietnamese area along the Cambodian border, in which 300 American soldiers were involved. Tanks and paratroopers were also used in this battle. In this war, which lasted from February to May 1967, 3,000 Vietnamese guerrillas were killed. Due to these successes, the American commanders were now victims of complacency that they were winning the war. The Central American commander in Vietnam, General William Westmoreland, started telling clearly in 1967 itself that in the next 2 years, the phased withdrawal of American forces from South Vietnam would begin. He used to say that victory is in our hands. When the American commanders were making big claims, at the same time the communists of South Vietnam, i.e. Vietcong guerrillas and Northern Vietnamese, started claiming that they were winning the war. The Vietnamese army was also secretly preparing for a big attack. Thousands of rebels of Viet Cong had entered the big cities in plain clothes by mixing with the common people. These Viet Cong had also used many secret and new methods to carry arms, such as they took out fake funerals in which weapons were kept inside the coffins instead of dead bodies. These coffins were buried in the graveyards near the common urban areas and military posts so that they could be taken out and used at the time of need. Apart from this, gunpowder was also carried in baskets of rice and tomatoes. Geography was also helping the Viet Cong a lot in such efforts, as a large part of Vietnam was covered with dense forests in which it was very easy to move forward by hiding. Apart from this, the Viet Cong, that is, those who were fighting against America, had dug long tunnels and tunnels from the border areas of northern Vietnam and Cambodia to far inside southern Vietnam. Weapons were carried on a large scale through these tunnels, rivers, and forest paths. In Vietnam, where the American forces were stationed, there were mass killings. All these secret routes were collectively called Ho Chi Minh Trail, that is, it was named after the Vietnamese communist leader Ho Chi Minh. With all these preparations, the guerrillas were now ready for the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was going to be a big surprise for the people present on foreign land. Friends, according to the local calendar of Vietnam, their new year begins with the spring season. The first day of the new year is called Tet, which in Vietnamese language means celebration of the first day. On this day, there is a holiday in Vietnam. People decorate their houses, delicious dishes are prepared, and feasts are held. In 1968, this festival was to be held on January 20th. That day was obviously a holiday in South Vietnam as well, and along with the Vietnamese, The American soldiers were also relaxing that there would be no fighting today. It was a holiday for everyone, but what happened was that on this very day, Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army surprised everyone. The attack was launched. This offensive, which started on the day of Tawar, is called Tet Offensive because of the occasion of this day. Vietnamese guerrillas attacked at least 100 targets simultaneously, which included big cities and bases of American and South Vietnamese troops. From the border of northern Vietnam to the far end of southern Vietnam, every important area was attacked that day, so much so that even Saigon, the capital of southern Vietnam, became a battlefield. 19 Vietnamese guerrillas blew up the barracks wall of the American embassy with a powerful bomb. Then they entered inside and started killing the security guards. The fight between the American Marines present in the embassy and the attackers continued for 6 hours. The Americans also used gunship helicopters. In this attack, many guerrillas and 2 American soldiers were killed. The marks of the attack on the barracks wall of the barracks were also very heavy. The most important target of Vietnam in the Tet Offensive was the American NIA, near the Laos border. This was a communist base. 6,000 American and South Vietnamese soldiers were deployed in this base. 15 to 200,000 regular soldiers of North Vietnam's main forces surrounded this base. These soldiers hid in the dense forest surrounding the base, and the Americans started heavily bombing the base. Now America was only able to supply food and weapons to this base from the air. To save its valuable soldiers, America also started heavy air attacks around the base. B-52 rockets were also used in the bombing. The Americans dropped more than 1 lakh tons of shells around the base in just 2 months. The Vietnamese also destroyed many rockets standing in the base. In April, American forces came from other areas of Vietnam and broke the siege of the base. The siege was broken, but the Americans started feeling so unsafe from this sudden attack and loss that they vacated the base in June. At least 200 American Marines were killed and 1,600 were wounded in the battle for the base. In comparison, the Vietnamese conditions are estimated to be in thousands. Friends, one dangerous result of the increasing losses of the American army in the Tet Offensive was that the American soldiers started taking revenge from the common Vietnamese civilians. They committed a war crime which was one of their many war crimes, but the American conscience should be ashamed of this till date. What was this crime, and how were those responsible for it saved? There was a small village named My Lai in southern Vietnam on March 15, 1968. The American squad was ordered to kill every single person there, including men, women, and even children. The American army sent to kill men, women, and even children was repeatedly asked through signals whether they had killed everyone or not. Was there anyone left? By evening, there were only dead bodies in the village of My Lai and the fields around it, and these were 400 to 500 dead bodies. The Americans burned even the houses and dead bodies of the village. The picture of genocide was made by Ronald Hebel, an American army photographer, which you have just seen. Friends, this incident of the massacre of Vietnam was reported to the senior American commanders on the same day, but the senior commanders did not take any action against those soldiers who had committed this genocide. On the contrary, the American Army magazine Stars and Stripes claimed that 128 communist soldiers had been killed in My Lai. The American Center Commander General Westmoreland even congratulated Charlie Company, saying that you have done an outstanding action. The incident of Meeker might never have been known to the American public, but what happened was that a year later, the famous American journalist Samar Harsh got a hint of it. He wrote an article and warned the world and the Americans about this heinous crime of America, genocide. Despite the news being common, no culprit was punished. Only the American squad commander William Calley, on whose orders this massacre took place, was sentenced to life imprisonment. This sentence was also reduced after some time. Rather, he was allowed to be released from jail and complete his sentence at home. This murderer of hundreds of innocent civilians and children was released from home on parole in 1975. Later, at the place of the My Lai joke, a memorial was built in which Vietnamese civilians were caring for their dead and wounded relatives. Friends, you should also know that William Calley apologized for this joke almost 40 years later. He must have wanted to save his future generations from some embarrassment, otherwise there was no need for this now. By September 1968, American forces defeated the Tet Offensive, which means that the guerrilla forces of northern Vietnam could not expel American forces from the southern Vietnamese areas. However, despite the defeat, the Vietnamese guerrilla forces hid in the forests and started guerrilla activities. The war was not over, rather Vietnam got an important battle because of the Tet Offensive. Success was achieved, however, and that was that corpses were being continuously sent to America from Vietnam in ships, and these corpses started turning the American people against the war. Large-scale anti-war protests started in America. In fact, the anti-war movement had started in America in 1965, i.e. when the American Army entered Vietnam. This movement was mostly led by students of universities. Students were its leaders. Anti-war Americans held protests across the country, and the biggest protest took place in New York in April 1967 outside the headquarters of the People's Republic of China. 1 lakh people participated in it. These anti-war protests were gaining such intensity that at times the White House had to call in the army to suppress them. The students gave a very brilliant reply to this. They used to hang flowers on the bayonets of the guns of the visiting soldiers, or present flowers to those soldiers. Many nonviolent movements started. This was one of the best faces. Another target of the anti-war movement was the American Draft Law. Under this law, the government could recruit the American citizens for the war. But the opponents of war started a campaign of protest against the draft law. They started protesting against this law and started refusing to join. Many people fled to Canada to avoid joining. But there was one American who believed in fighting more than running away. His name was Muhammad Ali. Heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali was also called to join the army in 1967. However, he clearly refused to join. He said that my conscience does not allow me to shoot my brothers, blacks, hungry and poor, for a very powerful America. Why should I shoot? They never taunted me for being black. I cannot shoot poor people. You may put me in jail. Like Muhammad Ali, the boxer, Martin Luther King, the hero of the civil rights movement in America, also opposed the draft law. Severe opposition. We're doing my job, and I was told goodbye to my friends. American elements gave severe punishment to Muhammad Ali for refusing the draft. He was given 5 years imprisonment, fined $100, and banned from boxing for 3 years. He was also stripped of his title of heavyweight champion. By the way, how Muhammad Ali escaped punishment and how he won his title again. You can know all this in detail in his biography. Its link is also available here on the I button anyway. The growing opposition to the war among the American people and the loss of lives of the Americans in the Tet Offensive had pushed President Johnson on the back foot. He had become so unpopular that he could clearly see his defeat in the Siddharth election, which was to be held in this year 68. He declared that he would not be a presidential candidate in this election. At the end of the year, when the election came near, the biggest issue had become the Vietnam War. The Republican candidate Richard Nixon took full advantage of this situation. He gave a slogan that by becoming the president and winning the election, he will bring peace to the entire America while protecting America's honor, i.e. peace with honor. He promised this to the American people. In the November 68 elections, Richard Nixon won 32 out of 50 American states and was elected President of America. Friends, Nixon had become president, but he did not fulfill his promise of ceasefire in Vietnam. Rather, he started fueling the fire of war. The reason for this was that he did not want to give the impression that America was returning after ending the war in a defeated state. Rather, he wanted to end this war on a victory note with some face-saving. So, sometimes he would announce reduction of troops in Vietnam, and sometimes he would launch a new operation. During his tenure, the draft lottery system was also started to recruit more civilians in the army. In this system, American youth were given numbers according to their date of birth. These numbers were entered in a box or machine. Then, by taking out some numbers from these numbers, the soldiers of the war were called. Along with all this, President Richard Nixon was aware that if he did not withdraw from the Vietnam War, his voters would be angry with him. So he made a policy, which is also known as Nixon Doctrine. According to this doctrine, the Americans gradually started taking control of the security of South Vietnam and started killing the local army there. After this, they had to leave Vietnam in a phased manner. On April 20, 1970, President Nixon announced that he would withdraw at least 1.5 lakh American soldiers from Vietnam within a year. This announcement was good, but what happened was that a few days after the announcement of withdrawing the army from Vietnam, he also announced an attack on Vietnam's neighbor Cambodia, i.e., instead of ending the war, he extended it. On April 30th, 1970, President Nixon addressed the nation on TV. He explained with the help of a map that the Vietnamese guerrillas have made their hideouts inside Cambodia's border. If these hideouts are not destroyed, the security of South Vietnam as well as Cambodia will be in danger. He said that people tell me that if I attack Cambodia, I will lose the next election and will be remembered in history as a president for only one term. But I do not want to turn America from a first-class superpower to a second-red superpower just for the sake of getting the presidency twice, and also see it getting defeated for the first time in its 190 years of history. I have hacked my party, and I have numbered 400,000 people fighting for our country's peace. On the orders of President Nixon, the American Army entered Cambodia from South Vietnam. In this operation, 32,000 American and 48,000 South Vietnam soldiers were taking part. This battle continued for about 3 months, but the American and the forces of South Vietnam were unsuccessful in destroying their enemies. They had to return to South Vietnam after suffering heavy losses. After this war, 338 coffins containing the dead bodies of American soldiers were sent to America. So, while the American forces were facing defeat here, they were facing defeat there. In America, students had intensified anti-war protests, so much so that President Nixon called the army once again to crush these protests. Then what happened was a big tragedy. On May 4th, American soldiers opened fire on students in Kent State University in Riyadh, killing 4 students, including 2 students, and injuring 8. In response to this state violence, lakhs of students came out on the streets. Strikes were organized in 200 colleges of America. The series of protests and clashes spread throughout the country. This was the time in America when pro-war groups also came to counter the anti-war protesters, that is, those who wanted to return victorious from Vietnam no matter what. Their biggest group was of construction workers who wore round hats on their heads. This helmet was called hard hat, so this is why this group was also named Hard Hats. Their slogan was that first there will be victory in Vietnam, only after that the army will return, and there will be peace. Then peace means the army should not be called back before victory. These people also used to take out big rallies against the war fighters, used to come on the streets, and used to say to them that we love America, or leave it. This group also attacked a student Mujahi in New York on May 8th. They beat up the students, pushed the journalists. Many journalists and students were also injured due to their violence. During the fight, Pace University and City Hall of New York were also attacked. The police controlled the situation with great difficulty. After this attack, President Nixon called the leaders of the Hard Hats to Washington, D.C., and met them and praised their patriotism and their love. The Union leaders also presented some helmets to the president as a gift, on one of which President Nixon's name was also written. So, friends, the increasing Mujahi in America and the killing of soldiers in Vietnam finally forced President Nixon to think that he should leave Vietnam. We have to get out of this war by stopping the massacre, but before evacuating Vietnam, President Nixon took a very important decision, which was also a very big policy U-turn in the history of America. That was to make Communist China its friend by distancing it from Russia. For this, Uncle Sam had to sacrifice 2 of his friends and 2 areas. These 2 friends were friends. Making China a friend did not prove to be very difficult for President Nixon. The reason for this was that China was already distancing itself from Russia. In March 1969, there had been some clashes between the 2 countries on the Russia-China border. There had been a little skirmish. Russia told America that we should wipe out China by dropping an atom bomb on it. You just remain neutral, meaning America should remain neutral. President Richard Nixon replied that if an atom bomb falls on China, then America will also launch nuclear missiles on 130 cities of Russia. After this warning, Russia did not talk about nuclear attack on China again. During this time, there were secret talks between China and America, and backdoor diplomacy also started in which Pakistan played a key role because among the American countries, Pakistan was the closest to China. This backdoor diplomacy was successful. In July 1971, a plane flew from Pakistan and reached China. American Prime Minister Henry Kissinger was on board this plane. He met the Chinese authorities and then returned. 9 months later, in October 1971, the independent position of UN Security Council, which was earlier with Taiwan, was given to the Communist government of China, i.e. now it went to mainland China. Thus, China also got the right of veto in the Security Council. Obviously, all this happened at the behest of America, i.e. America, which earlier considered Taiwan's government as a representative government of China, now accepted Communist China. This was a big U-turn. On this, there was a strong protest against America in Taiwan. Taiwanese protested outside the American embassy that America is more dear to them than Taiwan. Muhammad Aziz was dear to him. He did not care for the Mujahi wings. Next year, in 1972, President Nixon visited China. This was the first visit of any American president after the Communist Revolution in China. President Nixon also met Chinese leader Mao Zedong, and thus began a new phase of relations between the two leaders. There was a small issue in this visit, that the Chinese gave the American president Chinese chopsticks instead of knives and blades, to which the Americans were accustomed. President Nixon kept trying to pick up small pieces of food with these sticks, and with patience he put only as much in his mouth or stomach as he could. After friendship with China, the interest of the American government in Vietnam had almost ended. So America needed some face saving to get out of Vietnam. It got this face saving in January 1973. In Paris, between southern and northern Vietnam, when the ceasefire agreement was signed, after the ceasefire, the American forces in Vietnam took down the flags from their bases and headed towards their homes. The Americans were in such a hurry that within 2 months of the ceasefire agreement, all the combat soldiers were called back. Some forces that were present in Tam Gon to protect the U.S. Embassy remained there. Apart from this, American aircraft carriers also remained present in the sea near Vietnam. The American withdrawal took place just 2 years after America's exit. In 1975, when a ceasefire agreement was signed between southern and northern Vietnam in Paris, after the ceasefire, the American forces in Vietnam took down their flags from their bases and headed for their homes. The Americans were in such a hurry that within 2 months of the ceasefire agreement, all the combat soldiers were called back. Some forces that were present in Tam Gon to protect the U.S. Embassy remained there. Apart from this, American aircraft carriers were also present in the sea near Vietnam. The American withdrawal came just 2 years after America's exit. In 1975, North Vietnam ignored this decision and occupied southern Vietnam. Lakhs of citizens of southern Vietnam left their country in boats to escape the retaliatory actions of the communist forces. On this occasion, a large number of helicopters from American aircraft carriers reached the areas of southern Vietnam and evacuated civilians from there, and especially helped in repelling the attack of Messiah. Thousands of civilians of South Vietnam were also killed by American helicopters on aircraft carriers. The number of Vietnamese Mujahideen was so high that to make space for them, the Americans had to throw many helicopters from the aircraft carrier into the sea, after which some of the helicopters that were supposed to land on the aircraft carrier had to make an emergency landing in the sea, during which they drowned. Despite all this, the number of Vietnamese Mujahideen was not decreasing. In the end, the civilians of South Vietnam, especially in Saigon, were so disparonia, praise. 5,000 Vietnamese civilians took refuge in America at different times after the war. On April 29, 1973, the last American helicopter in Saigon, carrying some civilians, left from the roof of the U.S. Embassy. After Taiwan, America's second friend, i.e. South Vietnam, had also been sacrificed, and these were the friends that America had saved from China. President Nixon was on the verge of gaining popularity after getting America out of the Vietnam War. In the 1972 presidential election, he achieved historic success and became president for the second term. He won 49 out of 50 American states. This was the biggest record in the history of American elections. But before the election, he had committed a grave mistake which proved to be disastrous for his second term. That mistake was to spy on the opposition group. On June 17, 1972, 5 men tried to enter the Watergate building in Washington, D.C., which was the head office of the Democrats. These men worked for President Nixon's election campaign. Their mission was to set up spying posts in the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. But before they could do so, they were caught along with their men. This scandal is known till date as the Watergate scandal because of the proximity of this building. So, when the matter of 5 men being caught became common knowledge, when this happened, President Richard Nixon, who was also a candidate for the next term, started getting defamed. He addressed the nation on this. In this speech, he swore that the White House, that is, he had nothing to do with this mysterious espionage case. He himself was not involved in it at all. That is, the people who were caught trying to enter the headquarters of the Democrats and trying to set up a spying situation were not sent by him, nor was he aware of it. The American voters believed the president, and after that, you know that he won the election for the second term as well. But the FBI kept on making continuous inquiries about this scandal. During this inquiry, President Richard Nixon made another mistake that he kept on mumbling in the middle of this inquiry to save his name. He gave millions of dollars to the accused so that he does not open his mouth against them. Then, he also tried to create hurdles in the way of this inquiry by using the CIA, which made it clear that President Nixon had some hand in the Watergate scandal. Now what happened was that an intelligence agency, the source of power, who was called Deep Throat, told all this secret to the media. Apart from this, White House lawyer John Dean also exposed Richard Nixon's involvement in this case in front of Senate's Watergate Committee. Then some other close people of President Nixon also lied in this matter, and after that continuous hurdles were created in the way of justice. Due to extreme public pressure, Congress started the process of impeachment of the president. Processions were also taken out outside the White House demanding that the president should be impeached soon. President Nixon wanted to avoid the matter, so he resigned on August 9, 1974. Thus, after achieving a historic record success in the election, President Nixon also became the first president in the history of America to resign. In his place, Vice President Gerald Ford became the new president. He pardoned former President Nixon in the Watergate scandal, and thus the matter came to an end. Friends, 58,220 American soldiers were killed in the Vietnam War, while more than 3 lakh were injured, out of whom many became disabled for life. America suffered a loss of $150 billion in this war. $150 billion, which if we see in today's currency rate, according to an estimate, comes to about $800 billion. More than 10 lakh soldiers and guerrilla soldiers of North Vietnam were killed. Apart from this, at least 10 lakh Vietnamese civilians were also killed. 2 lakh soldiers of South Vietnam also lost their lives, i.e. 22 lakh Vietnamese. 2.2 million Vietnamese were killed from both sides, North and South. So, according to some estimates, the number of Vietnamese killed was there were more than 30 lakh to 3 million people in Vietnam. In fact, every 10th civilian was killed or injured in this war. America dropped bombs weighing more than 70 lakh 7 million tons on Vietnam and the countries around it. These bombs are 300 times more powerful than the atom bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. America also used napalm bombs on a large scale to destroy Vietnamese forests. Friends, you must have seen this picture before, which you are seeing on the screen. In this picture, an innocent girl who is burning due to the napalm bomb has been captured running helplessly on the road. Such pictures played a very important role in turning the American public against the war. Apart from napalm, America also used chemical weapons a lot through bombing the forests. The failure in Vietnam was America's first big military defeat. It could not save South Vietnam from going under communist control, but it did get some political benefit from this war. America defeated China. It was separated from the communist bloc, the advantage of which was that after Vietnam, China never gave military help to any other country against America in any other war. America learned a lesson from its defeat in Vietnam and changed its military doctrine as well. The draft law was abolished and the recruitment of civilians for wars was stopped. Today you see that whenever America goes to any country, it hides its soldiers behind strong concrete walls. Strong military vehicles are built for their protection. In many places, instead of sending soldiers, only drones and missiles are used. The reason for all this is the lessons of Vietnam, the lessons learned from there, because America can no longer see the pictures of its regular soldiers being killed and returning to American cities in coffins at airports because public opinion becomes very much against these pictures. Friends, America had come out of the Vietnam War. It had also separated China from the communist bloc, but its biggest enemy, Soviet Russia, was still a threat to the American global order. America wanted that the Soviet Union Russia should be avenged for Vietnam's defeat, and its superpower status should also be ended. He was looking for a Vietnam for Russia as well. He found this Vietnam in the hills and cities of Afghanistan. A partner like Pakistan was also ready to help America in this war. So how did America control the Russian Reich in this war? How did it pull it back? What was the famous Jawan Mushy policy of President Reagan, and how did Soviet Russia actually end? How did Soviet Russia break up? How did the world change from bipolar to unipolar? We will show you all this. But the next chapter of America's history is on December 24, 1979. A revolution took place in the Afghan capital Kabul. Thousands of Russian soldiers entered the city and captured it. On December 27th, Afghan President Hafizullah Amin was also killed in Kabul's Taj Beg Mahal. In his place, a native Afghan leader Babur Kamil was brought back and made the president of Afghanistan. The Afghan people protested against the puppet president and Russian occupation. This change in Afghanistan, this Russian issue, was the one that gave America a golden opportunity to take revenge for its defeat in Vietnam. But in those days, America itself was a victim of the crisis of the Soviet Union. In 1980, i.e. after 1 year, the Americans elected a new president of the party to deal with this crisis and to face Soviet Russia. This president was Ronald Reagan of the Republican Party. But it had been only a month and a half since he took office when a murderous attack was made on him. America's future and political future was at stake and the president was injured. How did America deal with this crisis, and how did it become the only superpower of the world? I am Faisal Days, and watch, listen, and know that in this 6th installment of History of America Season 3, we will show you all this. On March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was leaving a hotel in Washington, D.C. when he was shot at. The attacker, John Hinckley, was a man with neurosis and was also in love with the famous actress Judy Foster. He had seen Judy's film Taxi Driver, whose hero tries to kill a presidential candidate and fails. Don't know why, this thing had got into John's mind that if he kills the president, he will get Judy Foster's love, and maybe she will also become his girlfriend. In this fantasy of his, he fired bullets at President. Besides President, 3 other people were also injured in the firing. 1 bullet hit President Reagan's chest and injured his left lung. President was taken to George Washington University Hospital, but 70-year-old President Reagan, who was conscious despite being shot, walked to the hospital on his own feet even in this dangerous condition. His destiny was working great. In a light mood, he told his wife Nancy that, "Honey, look, I could not bend down on time and I got beaten up." Then when he reached the operation theater, everyone started jokingly asking the doctor, "I hope you all are Republicans." In response to this, the doctor said, "Janab Sadr, today we are all Republicans." After this, Sadr was operated upon, and the bullet was removed. After the operation, Sadr recovered so fast that even the doctors were surprised. In the very next month of the murderous attack, in April, he recovered and returned to the White House. We will tell you an interesting thing. Sadr Reagan, on whom a film fantasy firing Ka bias was made, had himself been a film star in his youth. President Reagan had worked in more than 50 films, and even before becoming Sadr, he was a well-known personality of America. And yes, the person who fired at him, John Hinckley, was arrested from the spot itself, but due to being a self-absorbed patient, a murder case could not be filed against him. He was killed in a center for psycho patients. Then, for 40 years, efforts were made to remove from his mind the scenes of that film because of which he had fired at Sadr. Now, I don't know whether this was treatment or imprisonment. Anyway, friends, in 1981, Sadr Reagan had proved that he is a courageous ruler and has the capability to take decisions. His capability is also expressed by another statement that is, in August 81, thousands of employees of the air traffic staff went on strike. Due to this strike, More than 7,000 flights were stranded. Sadr Gaghan gave an ultimatum of 48 hours to the employees to return to work. I am 2 hours away. They are in lesson of the law, and if they do not report for work after 48 hours, they have then and will be terminated. But even after 48 hours, when the employees did not return to work, Sadr gave a 48-hour ultimatum to these thousands of employees. There were about 11,000 of them. They were fired, and new people were recruited in their place. Now, the biggest challenge in front of Sadr Reagan was the economy. In 1981, more than 80.8 million people were unemployed in America. Apart from this, interest on loans had also increased from 15% to 15%. Inflation was skyrocketing, and people were very troubled. The biggest thing was that the American economy had become a victim of recession. New businesses were not getting any benefit. Entrepreneurship was closed. To deal with this situation, he reduced income taxes a bit. He also reduced the bad taxes. He even put cuts on the facilities of healthcare and home financing. That is, he caused some loss to the American citizens. Sadr Reagan's economic theory was that when taxes are reduced, people will invest more in business. In this way, new jobs will be created which will generate new tax revenue, and this will finally balance the national budget. Apart from this, when big capitalists are forced to invest more in business, then the government will start investing more in them. If they get more profit, then they will invest more in America only. This will create more jobs for common people, i.e., there will be a trickle-down effect due to which money will start flowing from the rich class to the poor class. This economic theory of Sadr Reagan is called Reaganomics, aptly after his name. There is still a debate on the benefits and disadvantages of fellow economics, but it is a fact that from 1981 to 89, i.e. during the 13-year rule of Sadr Reagan, and even after that for many years, America progressed a lot. Due to tax exemption on such businesses, investment really increased tremendously. Loans started getting at interest rates lower than banks. Thus, business persons and companies started expanding their business by taking huge loans. Due to increase in investment, stock markets went up by more than 100%. The number of fast food restaurants and stalls increased by 70%. There came a time when every year 1 lakh American urbanites started entering the category of millionaires. The number of credit cards with these wealthy Americans had increased more than the number of registered voters. In the 80s, more than 50 lakh mobile phones and more than 6 crore 70 lakh computers were also available in America. In the same period, in 1985, Bill Gates' Microsoft company also released the Windows operating system, which proved to be a revolutionary step in the world of computers. And returning to American cities in coffins at airports because public opinion becomes very much against these pictures. Friends, America had come out of the Vietnam War. It had also separated China from the communist bloc, but its biggest enemy, Soviet Russia, was still a threat to the American global order. America wanted that the Soviet Union Russia should be avenged for Vietnam's defeat, and its superpower status should also be ended. He was looking for a Vietnam for Russia as well. He found this Vietnam in the hills and cities of Afghanistan. A partner like Pakistan was also ready to help America in this war. So how did America control the Russian Reich in this war? How did it pull it back? What was the famous Jawan Mushy policy of President Reagan, and how did Soviet Russia actually end? How did Soviet Russia break up? How did the world change from bipolar to unipolar? We will show you all this. But the next chapter of America's history is on December 24, 1979. A revolution took place in the Afghan capital Kabul. Thousands of Russian soldiers entered the city and captured it. On December 27th, Afghan President Hafizullah Amin was also killed in Kabul's Taj Beg Mahal. In his place, a native Afghan leader Babur Kamal was brought back and made the president of Afghanistan. The Afghan people protested against the puppet president and Russian occupation. This change in Afghanistan, this Russian issue, was the one that gave America a golden opportunity to take revenge for its defeat in Vietnam. But in those days, America itself was a victim of the crisis of the Soviet Union. In 1980, i.e. after 1 year, the Americans elected a new president of the party to deal with this crisis and to face Soviet Russia. This president was Ronald Reagan of the Republican Party. But it had been only a month and a half since he took office, when a murderous attack was made on him. America's future and political future was at stake, and the president was injured. How did America deal with this crisis, and how did it become the only superpower of the world? I am Faisal Days, and watch, listen, and know that in this 6th installment of History of America Season 3, we will show you all this. On March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was leaving a hotel in Washington, D.C. when he was shot at. The attacker, John Hinckley, was a man with neurosis and was also in love with the famous actress Judy Foster. He had seen Judy's film Taxi Driver, whose hero tries to kill a presidential candidate and fails. Don't know why, this thing had got into John's mind that if he kills the president, he will get Judy Foster's love, and maybe she will also become his girlfriend. In this fantasy of his, he fired bullets at President. Besides President, 3 other people were also injured in the firing. One bullet hit President Reagan's chest and injured his left lung. President was taken to George Washington University Hospital, but 70-year-old President Reagan, who was conscious despite being shot, walked to the hospital on his own feet even in this dangerous condition. His destiny was working great. In a light mood, he told his wife Nancy that, "Honey, look, I could not bend down on time and I got beaten up." Then when he reached the operation theater, everyone started jokingly asking the doctor, "I hope you all are Republicans." In response to this, the doctor said, "Jan Abe Sauter, today we are all Republicans." After this, Sauter was operated upon, and the bullet was removed. After the operation, Sauter recovered so fast that even the doctors were surprised. In the very next month of the murderous attack, in April, he recovered and returned to the White House. We will tell you an interesting thing. Sauter Reagan, on whom a film fantasy firing Ka bias was made, had himself been a film star in his youth. President Reagan had worked in more than 50 films, and even before becoming Sauter, he was a well-known personality of America. And yes, the person who fired at him, John Hinckley, was arrested from the spot itself, but due to being a self-absorbed patient, a murder case could not be filed against him. He was killed in a center for psycho patients. Then, for 40 years, efforts were made to remove from his mind the scenes of that film because of which he had fired at Sauter. Now, I don't know whether this was treatment or imprisonment. Anyway, friends, in 1981, Sauter Reagan had proved that he is a courageous ruler and has the capability to take decisions. His capability is also expressed by another statement that is, in August 81, thousands of employees of the air traffic staff went on strike. Due to this strike, more than 7,000 flights were stranded. Sauter Reagan gave an ultimatum of 48 hours to the employees to return to work. I am 2 hours away. They are in lesson of the law, and if they do not report for work after 48 hours, they have then and will be terminated. But even after 48 hours, when the employees did not return to work, Sauter gave a 48-hour ultimatum to these thousands of employees. There were about 11,000 of them. They were fired, and new people were recruited in their place. Now, the biggest challenge in front of Sauter Reagan was the economy. In 1981, more than 80.8 million people were unemployed in America. Apart from this, interest on loans had also increased from 15% to 15%. Inflation was skyrocketing, and people were very troubled. The biggest thing was that the American economy had become a victim of recession. New businesses were not getting any benefit. Entrepreneurship was closed. To deal with this situation, he reduced income taxes a bit. He also reduced the bad taxes. He even put cuts on the facilities of healthcare and home financing. That is, he caused some loss to the American citizens. Sauter Reagan's economic theory was that when taxes are reduced, people will invest more in business. In this way, new jobs will be created which will generate new tax revenue, and this will finally balance the national budget. Apart from this, when big capitalists are forced to invest more in business, then the government will start investing more in them. If they get more profit, then they will invest more in America only. This will create more jobs for common people, i.e. there will be a trickle-down effect due to which money will start flowing from the rich class to the poor class. This economic theory of Sauter Reagan is called Reagan mix, aptly after his name. There is still a debate on the benefits and disadvantages of fellow economics, but it is a fact that from 1981 to 89, i.e. during the 13-year rule of Sardar Reagan, and even after that for many years, America progressed a lot. Due to tax exemption on such businesses, investment really increased tremendously. Loans started getting at interest rates lower than banks. Thus, business persons and companies started expanding their business by taking huge loans. Due to increase in investment, stock markets went up by more than 100%. The number of fast food restaurants and stalls increased by 70%. There came a time when every year 1 lakh American urbanites started entering the category of millionaires. The number of credit cards with these wealthy Americans had increased more than the number of registered voters. In the 80s, more than 50 lakh mobile phones and more than 6 crore 70 lakh computers were also available in America. In the same period, in 1985, Bill Gates' Microsoft company also released the Windows operating system, which proved to be a revolutionary step in the world of computers. The Windows operating system became so popular that it made Bill Gates the richest man in the world, and he remained on this position for many years. Friends, in that period of progress, many Americans had a lot of money. Difficulties had also arisen. One negative effect of economics was that the difference between the rich and the poor was very high for a long time. Due to cuts in social securities and home financing, millions of people were deprived of medical facilities and their homes. Overall, economics had benefited America. America's GDP in 1980 was $1,150 billion, i.e. $11.5 trillion, but in 1988 it reached $1964 billion, i.e. $1,964 trillion. There was an increase of more than $800 billion. Friends, President Reagan had put the American economy on a proper level, but along with this, he had not forgotten America's old enemy Soviet Russia or USSR because he had to take revenge for America's defeat by making Afghanistan Russia's Vietnam, and this was a great opportunity for this. President Reagan was a big supporter of reducing taxes and government taxes, but when it came to America's defense and competition with Soviet Russia, instead of saving money, he would open the doors of the Treasury. Immediately after becoming president, he started working hard on projects to make America stronger against Soviet Russia. He increased the American defense budget tremendously. In 1980, America's defense budget was $143.69 billion. In the third year of President Reagan, it had increased to $309.66 billion. That is, it had more than doubled. President Reagan especially focused on strengthening the American Navy. When he took over the government, the American Navy had less than 400 foreign warships and other cruisers. However, in the 8 years of President Reagan, this number had increased to 591. The newly added ships included 3 aircraft carriers USS Carl Vinson, SS Theodore Roosevelt, and USS Abraham Lincoln. President Reagan made elaborate plans for these war preparations. Apart from this, he also made a tremendous plan to stop the attack of Soviet Russia's nuclear weapons. The official name of this plan was Strategic Defense Initiative, but it became famous by the name of Star Wars. You know that a Hollywood movie series with this name was a super hit in those times. So, the Star Wars plan of President Reagan was to give such capability to America that it could destroy many missiles on the way at the same time, that is, it could shoot them down before they reach America. For this purpose, many types of technologies started being used in laser nuclear missile systems and satellites. However, due to lack of budget and technical issues, this plan could not succeed. So, the other 2 plans of missile defense, the Third and Patriot missile defense systems, on which work was started during his time, were successful. Today, these missiles are the most important part of the security of America and its neighboring countries. Apart from the efforts to increase America's military power, President Reagan also started working day and night to make Afghanistan Russia's Vietnam. He started supplying arms to Afghan mujahideen on a large scale. American aid had to reach Afghanistan via Pakistan. Therefore, President Reagan also established friendly relations with Pakistan's military dictator General Jalal Haq. In December 1982, General Jalal Haq came to America on the invitation of President Reagan and was the guest of the president in the White House. General Jalal Haq had a map with him on which he had highlighted Afghanistan and Pakistan. There was a red arrow on it which was pointing from Central Asia towards Arabia and Persian Gulf. In between was only Pakistan. General Jalal Haq told the Americans that this is a reality. We are a frontline state. That is, we are the only obstacle in stopping Soviet Russia from reaching Arabian Sea and Prussia Gulf via Afghanistan. Obviously, between the lines, he was saying that for this, my rule is also necessary. I should be helped. President Reagan also understood this. That is why he did not make any comment on the general rule of General Jalal Haq. General Jalal Haq had also promised to Sardar Reagan that he would not make nuclear weapons. Although Pakistan was making nuclear weapons and the Americans knew about it, but keeping in mind the importance of Pakistan in the Soviet-Afghan War, America did not take any strict action against this program. Apart from Pakistan, Sardar Reagan also had very good relations with Afghans. He used to meet Afghan leaders in the White House and openly supported Afghan jihad. He used to call them freedom fighters. In 1986, in his State of the Union speech, without naming the Afghan war, he gave this message that soldiers of the freedom struggle, you are not alone, America stands with you. You are not alone, freedom fight or sort of a fighter. Fight for freedom, but win for yourself. In 1986, he gave new shoulder Mudstringer missiles to the Afghan Mujahideen. With the help of these missiles, the Afghan Mujahideen, about 270 Russian preparations and helicopters were also shot down. Now it is said that because of Stinger missiles, Soviet Russia was forced to leave Afghanistan. That is, it was the weapon that caused a lot of damage to its army. This is true to a large extent, but we modern researchers do not consider this claim to be completely correct. They say that Soviet leader Gorbachev had already decided to leave Afghanistan before the order of Stinger missiles was given to the Mujahideen. Apart from this, Russia had also started using flares to avoid Stinger missiles. That Fiza operation was carried out at night. Due to this, within a few months, the superiority of Shingar missiles, which was prevailing till then, ended. To put more pressure on Soviet Russia, President Reagan had also provided Pakistan with new F-16s. The reason for this was that Russian and Afghan fighters often entered Pakistan and bombed the Mujahideen hideouts there, i.e. they also used Pakistan's sovereignty. Without F-16, Pak Air Force was unable to stop the enemy's fighters. However, the order of new American fighters turned the tables. A-1 fighter started shooting down Russian and Afghan fighters. Pak Air Force shot down about 10 enemy fighters, out of which at least one was a Russian F-25 fighter which was shot down near Miran Shah. Its Russian pilot Alexander Rates was also arrested, who was then released under the Neva Convention. Alexander Rates later remained active in Russian politics as well, and also reached the position of vice president in clashes with Afghan fighters. A Pakistani F-16 was also destroyed. Friends, it was not only America and Pakistan who played a role in making Afghanistan the Vietnam of Russia, but also Saudi Arabia and many other countries. We have already shown the story of these countries in detail in this chapter of History of Pakistan and in these videos of Muslim Cold War. Their links are also available on the I button. After the video, you can know all this in more detail. So, friends, Assad Reagan had practically put Russia in a lot of trouble in Afghanistan, but he was also trying his best to establish friendly relations with America. Now, only this kind of people can say that in 1985, the leadership in Russia changed. In March, Mikhail Gorbachev became the Secretary General of the Russian Communist Party. In Soviet Russia, the Secretary General of the Communist Party is the real leader of the country. Later, in 1990, he also became the President of Soviet Russia. When he became the Secretary General, at that time Soviet Russia was neck and neck between the Afghan War and Mali Baram. In Europe, even in the Russian-controlled communist bloc, people were turning against communism. Gorbachev was a liberal thinker. As soon as he became the General Secretary, he started the jury reforms in Soviet Russia and the European Communist bloc. He also started promoting freedom of expression and other civil freedoms. Because of such a son-in-law, President Reagan also started trying to make Gorbachev his friend. The two leaders now started meeting. In 1985, their first meeting took place in Geneva, Switzerland. Next year, both leaders met in Iceland. During these meetings, there was a discussion between the two on reducing the nuclear threat. As a result of this discussion, in 1987, a summit was held on the control of nuclear weapons, which was named Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, IMF. On December 8th, both leaders signed this historic peace agreement in Washington, D.C. In this agreement, Russia and America agreed to establish medium-range nuclear weapons. They agreed to destroy the missiles. Despite all this presentation, American President Ronald Reagan was a little suspicious about Russia. He was a victim of suspicion, so when both the leaders came to address the press conference, President Reagan repeated a Russian saying, which in English means trust but verify. Trust but also verify, that is, he was saying that Russia will be asked whether they have fulfilled their promise of destroying their missiles or not. Friends, through this pledge, President Reagan had reduced the threat of war between America and Russia to a great extent. On the other hand, talks were also going on to remove Soviet Russia from Afghanistan. The historic Geneva Pledge was also finalized on April 14, 1988, the year after the Russia-America nuclear pledge. Apart from Soviet Russia and America, Pakistan and Afghan governments also signed this pledge. In the next month of May, President Reagan also visited Moscow, under which pledge was made on February 15. By 1989, the Russian army had completely left Afghanistan, meaning it had been defeated in Afghanistan. But America, which had taken this revenge, had only lost in Vietnam, whereas Soviet Russia was also torn into pieces after being defeated in Afghanistan, in such a way that in the next year, in November 1989, the Berlin Wall, the symbol of Soviet Russia's victory in Europe, was demolished. The interesting thing is that President Reagan, who had left the White House after completing both his terms, was president when he was addressing Gorbachev. Once while addressing in Berlin, he had said to demolish this wall now, meaning the fall of Berlin Wall was a dream of President Reagan, which was fulfilled 2 years later in December 1991. Soviet Russia too. Soviet Union broke into pieces. Many of the kingdoms included in it are Azerbaijan and Byzantium, which were once a part of USSR and Soviet Russia. Well, now with the end of Soviet Russia, the Cold War was concluded with the victory of America. USA had emerged as the only superpower of the world. Reagan played a fundamental role in this success of America. But it seems that the American nature had become too war-loving because they were happily going out of the Cold War to get entangled in another war which was named the so-called War on Terror. The foundation of this war was also laid in 1990, a year before the end of Soviet Union. It was like this that on August 2, 1990, Iraq occupied its small neighboring country Kuwait. On this, the then U.S. President George Bush took on Iraq, and for this, he lent his army to Saudi Arabia. In January 1991, America and its allies attacked Iraq and liberated Kuwait. This war is called the First Gulf War. You can read its detailed story in this installment of History of Pakistan and in our blog. Links to these are also available on the I button. In the Iraq-Kuwait War, due to American influence, Iraq got out of Kuwait. Kuwait became independent, but there was a lot of disagreement in the Muslim world on the issue that why did America land its army on the sacred land of Saudi Arabia? Especially Osama bin Laden, who had also participated in the Afghan Jihad, started a Muslim struggle to expel America from Saudi Arabia. Now America was going to face its old Arab and Afghan allies, whom it used to call Mujahideen in the Soviet-Afghan War. Then 9/11 happened, friends, which changed America and the world forever. What effects did 9/11 have on American superpower status? What strategy was adopted in on terror? How did Afghanistan become America's new Vietnam, and what did it become? We will show you all this, but in the next and last installment of History of America, the Al-Qaeda attacks of September 2001 in America changed the whole world. 9/11 became a proverb, but a bigger change came when America attacked Afghanistan and Iraq with full force in order to stop it. America was once again trapped in unwinnable wars due to which its soft power was lost. The 20-year war in Afghanistan and the 8-year war in Iraq brought America down from the status of being the sole superpower of the world, and a new multi-power world, multipolar world started coming into existence. How did America come down from the status of sole superpower in the last 20 years? After all, why did the Americans elect Saud, who openly lies and has been caught for the second time? I am Faisal Reyes, and in the last episode of History of America Season 3 of Deko Suno Jano, we will show you all this. 4 days after the 9/11 attacks, a terrorist attack took place in American Saud's office, Camp David. An important meeting was held in which President Joe W. Bush under President Donald Rumsfeld and Vice Prime Minister Paul Wolfowitz were present. In this meeting, 3 targets were set for the so-called World War on Terror. The first target was al-Qaeda, the second was Afghan Taliban, and the third was Saddam Hussein's Iraq. An immediate attack should also be launched on the Deputy Prime Minister. President Bush himself believed that Iraq was also somehow responsible for the 9/11 attacks. However, he immediately approved the attack only on Afghanistan, where the members of al-Qaeda were staying. He postponed the attack on Iraq for some time. Pakistan's approval was also necessary for the capture of Afghanistan because Pakistan had accepted the rule of Afghan Taliban, and its neighbor was also Afghanistan. All foreign trade of Afghanistan was also done through the Pakistani port Karachi, so the American government started efforts to join hands with Pakistan. The then-President General Pervez Musharraf later claimed that he rather threats were given to include them in terror. He has written 2 sentences in his autobiography, In the Line of Fire. He says that first I received a call from American Prime Minister Colin Powell. He asked whether you are with us or against us. President Musharraf assured him that we are with you in the war against terrorism. The next day, American Deputy Prime Minister Richard Ortiz again threatened Pakistan through Director General ISI General Mahmoud Ahmed. He said that if you support the terrorists, then be ready, we will bomb you and push you into the Stone Age. However, American Deputy Prime Minister Richard Armstrong later refuted this claim and said that he had not threatened Pakistan. Anyway, whether there was any such threat or not, but the fact was that General Musharraf had agreed to support America in this war. He also sent a message to the Taliban that they should kill Osama bin Laden. If this happens, General Musharraf thought that the al-Qaeda network should be removed from the country. But the Taliban leader Mullah Omar refused to accept this demand because he used to call the Arab Mujahideen as Guest Mujahideen. On October 7, 2001, America and its ally Britain attacked Afghanistan in the name of Operation Enduring Freedom. For this attack, the air bases of the Bataan-occupied island of Diego Garcia in Oman and South Bahr Hind were being used. Apart from this, American aircraft carriers were also operating from the Bahrain Arabian Sea from the carrier Carl Vinson. All these terrorists used to drop bombs on Afghanistan by crossing the Pakistani air border. These terrorists were also getting logistics support from 2 Pakistani air bases, Shamsi and Shahbaz in Sindh and Balochistan, which were handed over to America by the military dictator General Musharraf. America destroyed a lot of Afghanistan in its attack. Weapons were also used. The most dangerous among them was the Bomb Days cutter, which weighed 15,000 pounds. Wherever it fell, it would flatten every building within a radius of 600 meters. The bombing was so much that in that era the term corporate bombing became a common military term. Corporate bombing meant that instead of hitting a particular military target, the entire area should be destroyed. So America was doing corporate bombing on the Taliban. The American bombing was so severe that even the Taliban hiding in the underground trenches were killed. Mostly those Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters survived who had gone away from Kabul or hid in the border areas of Iran and Pakistan. How the Taliban hid, how they regrouped, and how they faced the Americans again and won. You can see this story in more detail in our section on the background of the Afghan War. After this video, you must watch my Curious Fellows War on Terror when it started. It seemed like an American victory. America's first 2 targets, i.e. dismantling of al-Qaeda and Taliban organizations, had been achieved. After this, America established Afghan puppet government in Kabul under the leadership of Hamid Karzai. To continue the campaign against al-Qaeda and support President Hamid Karzai, America also established more than 700 army bases in Afghanistan. This success also boosted the morale of American President George Bush, so much so that he lied to his community and the whole world. Friends, the biggest lie that America had concocted for attacking Iraq after Afghanistan was weapons of mass destruction. American government claimed that Iraq has a lot of weapons that can cause mass destruction. It has such dangerous weapons that if terrorists get hold of them, they will destroy America. These aliases were commonly called WMDs, and it generally meant chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. According to President W. Bush, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein had to be removed before using dangerous weapons, and establishing a puppet government in Iraq was also very important for the protection of the world and the protection of America. But the claim that Iraq had WMDs was a lie. The reason for this was that since the first Gulf War, 10 years before September 11th, Iraq was within the American borders. Most of the northern and southern Iraq had been declared a no-fly zone for Iraqi aircraft. American aircraft used to take off from Saudi Arabian and Turkish air bases and freely travel in Iraqi airspace. Iraq's independence had also ended. It was allowed to export only a little oil, and in return it could import only food items and medicines. Iraq's limited trade was also under the strict supervision of the Qumdutda. The ships carrying food to Iraq were also strictly checked to ensure that no weapons or weapons-making material was being smuggled in them. Iraq could not buy even a knife from the world in the name of weapons. Under these circumstances, it was impossible for Iraq to export weapons. WMD could create dangerous weapons, but the inner circle of U.S. President George W. Bush, his kitchen cabinet, had already decided to attack Iraq. Behind this was the wealth of oil. There was a huge lure of petrodollars hidden. But anyway, to make the American people in favor of attacking Iraq, a lot of propaganda was done at the government and journalistic level. President W. Bush used to lie to the Americans by looking straight into their eyes that Saddam Hussein was making dangerous weapons. I take the threat as evidence. I take the fact. LP officer. American Prime Minister Donald Ramsey Feed went a step further. He used to say that we have proof that Iraq is training al-Qaeda in chemical weapons. Very reliable reporting of senior-level contact, going back to a dead end and a possible chemical and biological agent training. One eye-to-eye contact. I mean between Iraq and al-Qaeda. He used to say with confidence that there is no scope for any debate on the issue of Iraqi weapons. This is open proof. We know they have weapons of mass destruction. We know they have an active program. There is no debate about it in the White House as well as the American media. A story was published in propaganda in which it was claimed that an Iraqi engineer Adnan al-Haydri has escaped from Iraq and reached Bangkok. He has met American intelligence officers there and has made sensational revelations about Iraq's chemical and nuclear weapons. The Iraqi engineer claimed that he had renovated at least 20 secret chemical and nuclear sites of Iraq just a year ago, i.e. in 2000. According to his claim, these sites of dangerous weapons are also present under the houses inside Siwa and under the Saddam Hussein Hospital in Baghdad. According to the newspaper, experts had declared this engineer's story as credible and important. Despite the claims of the government and journalists, many people were doubting that WMD is just an excuse. Oil wealth is the real target. This was the reason why people opposing the Iraq War in the world, including America, came out on the streets and started shouting slogans, "No blood for oil," i.e. we should not shed blood for the possession of Iraqi oil. It was not acceptable to the extent that even school children came out on the streets carrying posters. Two of America's closest allies, NATO, France and Germany, also refused to support the American adventure in Iraq. This refusal infuriated the extreme warmongers in America. To teach France a lesson, they started a failed attempt to boycott French cheese and champagne. The name of French fries in the government cafes of Washington was changed to Freedom Fries. The warmongers in America tried to settle scores with France by calling French toast as Freedom Toast. In view of the global opposition to the Iraq War, America raised this issue in the Security Council of the Public Opinion so that America could not be accused of aggression. On February 5, 2003, American Prime Minister Karja Cologne Paul gave a speech in the Security Council on the issue of Iraq. He explained through a complete video presentation that Iraq is making dangerous weapons which can come into the hands of terrorists. They have taken up chemical weapons. If even a single sample of the enemy was voted on by the Security Council, Russia and France would veto it. Therefore, America decided to attack Iraq on its own by bypassing the Security Council. In this attack, 2 memorandums were kept with America. Iraq's army was so weak due to American sanctions that the question of fighting did not arise. Dozens of soldiers started surrendering before the American army gathered at the Iraqi border, even before the war began. Immediately after the attack started on March 20th, thousands of soldiers also started surrendering. The American army did not face any defeat on any front. Within about 1.5 months, the American army had occupied the whole of Iraq, including Baghdad. After the occupation, the Americans also started demolishing the statue of Saddam Hussein and gave the impression to the Iraqi people that we have freed you from the dictator. Iraq's praise Burker gave a victory speech on the carrier Abraham Lincoln. For this speech, a banner saying "Mission Accomplished" was put up on the plane. President Bush declared that the major military operation in Iraq has ended, meaning the mission to occupy Iraq has been accomplished. The war is over. The American soldiers thought that the Iraqi people have wholeheartedly accepted their illegal occupation, but their happiness could not last long. On May 15th, President Bush declared victory, and a few days after this, attacks on American forces began all over Iraq. Initially, there was no major loss of life of American soldiers, but in a few months, these attacks became more intense. On November 2, 2003, an American snow helicopter was shot down by a missile in the west of Baghdad. In this attack, 16 American soldiers were killed and 20 were injured. After this, more attacks continued. In 2003, a total of 486 American soldiers were killed and 5,353 American soldiers were injured. America and its allies thought that perhaps this entire movement was being led by Saddam Hussein, who had not been arrested till that time. Therefore, America intensified its efforts to arrest him. On December 13, 2003, Saddam Hussein was arrested from a farmhouse near his native area Talcott. How the Americans reached Saddam Hussein, then how he was arrested and how he was given many punishments. You can read this entire story on our. You can watch this video by clicking on the subscribe button. So friends, after Saddam Hussein's arrest, the Americans were hopeful that maybe now the war would end. But what happened was that the war in Iraq intensified. Next year, in 2004, the Iraqi Jinnahs killed 849 American soldiers. All this was happening, but those weapons of mass destruction, WMD, in the name of which Iraq was attacked were nowhere to be seen. The American Defense Agency Pentagon and the CIA set up a fact-finding mission in the name of Iraq Survey Group to find weapons that could spread destruction in Iraq. 1,400 people were involved in this mission. This group went to Iraq and thoroughly searched every place, including the old military bases, factories, and the Sadarat Mahal. Despite months of hard efforts, they could not find a single weapon or any trace of it that could be called even close to WMD. Tired and defeated, this group went back. On January 28, 2004, Sarb David of this group appeared before the U.S. Senate's General Secretary Committee. He said that our estimates about the dangerous weapons that could spread destruction in Iraq were wrong. After this, he resigned from his post. In June, the National Commission formed to investigate the 9/11 attacks also released its report. In this report, it was written that although there was a relationship between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, but no evidence of any operational connection was found between them. That is, the allegation of Iraq being involved in the 9/11 attacks was also proved wrong. Then the matter did not stop here. On July 9, 2004, the U.S. Senate's Intelligence Committee released a report on 511 attacks. In this report, the CIA was accused that the information it had given to the U.S. government regarding the weapons that could spread destruction in Iraq was wrong. Iraq Survey Group 9/11 Commission and Intelligence Report. After this, what should have happened was that just like Saddam Nixon resigned in the Watergate scandal, George W. Bush should have also resigned, but this did not happen. The American president put all the blame on the CIA chief George Tenet. It was said that the American president and his management were innocent. It was the intelligence that had given them wrong information. George Tenet's resignation was taken. His resignation was announced by President Bush himself, and he said that he was resigning on the basis of casteism. After the killing of thousands of innocent people, President Bush changed the angle of his conversation a bit regarding Iraq. Now he started saying with great arrogance that removing a dangerous dictator like Saddam Hussein was a completely correct decision. He started justifying the war in Iraq on every issue with a new angle in which WMDs were no longer present. If you are surprised at President W. Bush's arrogance, then at that time we also listened to the former U.S. Prime Minister Donald Rumsfeld, who is still saying that Iraq has WMD. The reality is that something happened to the stockpiles of weapons. They were robbed, and they moved out of the Con, and they destroyed them. Friends, by putting the entire blame of the Iraq War on the CIA, U.S. President George W. Bush and his ministers took on a big responsibility. They also fought the November 2004 presidential election with a big tie. The surprising thing was that despite the heavy casualties of American soldiers in Iraq and the white lie being caught, the American public elected W. Bush as president for the second term. This was also because the wounds of 9/11 were still fresh in the minds of the Americans, and they supported the Afghan war started by President Bush. That is, the public forgave his mistakes in the Iraq War. George W. Bush remained the President of America till January 2009. During this time the war in Iraq continued, and the casualties of American soldiers kept increasing. America understood this. It was felt that in order to establish peace here, it is necessary to hand over the Qamdi regime to Iraq as soon as possible. Therefore, in January 2005, elections were held in Iraq and a 100-year elected government was established. In 2006, Nur al-Maliki was appointed as the prime minister of this new government. However, even after the establishment of this government, the series of attacks on American soldiers did not stop. 2007 was the most dangerous year for the Americans in Iraq. This year, 904 American soldiers were killed in Iraq. In 2008, when President Bush was leaving the White House, he also visited Iraq on a farewell tour. Here, Iraqi Safia also gave him a special kind of farewell. On December 14, 2008, President Bush was addressing a press conference in Baghdad with Iraqi Prime Minister Nur al-Maliki. An Iraqi journalist, Muntaz Zaidi, told him about this. But both the shoes were pulled at him. President Bush quickly ducked and dodged both the blows. None of the shoes hit him. But this incident once again proved that the Iraqi people were not against the American occupation of their country. How much support do they give to the decision? By the way, some memorials of this shoe were also made in Iraq. The grief and anger of the Iraqi people and the increasing loss of life in the war finally convinced the American people that they would have to call back the army from Iraq. The Iraqis would never stop protesting against the occupation. Therefore, in the 2008 presidential election, they elected a new president to get out of this war. This president also proved to be a milestone in American history. In the 2008 presidential election, for the first time, a pro-American citizen, Barack Obama, became the President of America. This was the second major milestone after the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s in terms of the rights of pro-Americans in America. Apart from this, Barack Obama had run his election campaign on the promise that he would withdraw the American army from Iraq. By the time Barack Obama became president, more than 4,000 American soldiers had been killed in Iraq. He immediately started a new presidential election to reduce the number of soldiers in Iraq. On February 27, 2009, President Barack Obama announced that the U.S. would withdraw all its troops from Iraq by December 2011. Under this schedule, all the American combat forces, fighters, and soldiers left Iraq by August 19, 2010. Only the non-military attack force, i.e. trainers and technical staff, remained in Iraq till 2011 so that it could help the government formed under American support. Next year, on December 18, 2011, the last American military contingent also crossed the Kuwait border and left Iraq. America's Iraq war keeps asking to go to its end. Friends, how did Daesh come into existence? What was ISIS? You can also watch our video on this by clicking on the look button after this video. Friends, President Barack Obama had fulfilled his promise of ending the war, but he had also made another promise to the American people, and that was to bring al-Qaeda's chief Osama bin Laden to justice, or to finish him off. In his election campaign, he had declared that if he gets to know the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, he would get him killed there as well. President Barack Obama got the opportunity to fulfill this promise during his presidency itself. On May 2, 2011, American Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden in the Pakistani city of Abbottabad under the tactics of the Russian Neptune spear. This was the most important achievement in America's long so-called war against terror that that it had achieved so far. But apart from killing bin Laden, America could not achieve any major success in Afghanistan. The new Afghan army that America had created to support the Kabul government was being badly defeated by the Taliban. In fact, it had started to happen that the Taliban used to recruit their own people in this army, who, as soon as they got a chance, would kill American soldiers and run away and take away their weapons as well. The American army used to call these attacks green-on-blue attacks. Apart from this, these soldiers were also secretly taking away the weapons of the Afghan forces. But they used to smuggle the Taliban out of Afghanistan, which means it was clear that the U.S. Army and its puppet government cannot keep the Taliban away from the throne of Kabul for a limited time. So the U.S. started negotiations with the Taliban in Qatar. After a long period of negotiations, on February 29, 2020, during the tenure of President Donald Trump, an agreement was signed between the U.S. and the Taliban. Under the agreement, the U.S. Army was to leave Afghanistan on May 29, 2021. In the same year, i.e. in 2020, there were presidential elections in the U.S. In these elections, Joe Biden of the Democratic Party, who was also the deputy president along with President Barack Obama, won the American Revolution from Afghanistan. Then, under his supervision, the American military revolution from Afghanistan was completed. At the time of the American military revolution from Afghanistan, similar heartbreaking scenes were seen at the Kabul airport as were seen 46 years back in the Vietnam's capital, Vietnam. Thousands of death spraying were seen in Saigon. We also lost our soldiers. In such a situation, when the American army was still present at the Kabul airport, the Taliban entered the city and captured the entire city, including Sadarat Mahal, while Afghan Sadr Ashraf Ghani had already escaped from the country in a hurry after sensing the situation. The Taliban had captured the entire city from the Kabul airport due to peace. Hundreds of American soldiers were not targeted. On the night between the 30th and the 31st of August, the last American soldier, Christ Nahu, also left Afghanistan. What an atrocity that America replaced Taliban with Taliban after spending trillions of dollars, thousands of soldiers, and killing lakhs of innocent people. The Afghan War was the longest war in American history. In this 20-year war, 2,465 American soldiers were killed, while in Iraq from 2003 to 2011, 4,490 American soldiers were killed. In both the wars, American soldiers also committed war crimes. In Cuba, American prisons were jailed, and in Mumbai, pictures and videos of inhuman torture on Taliban and al-Qaeda prisoners also became common. Apart from this, dogs were let loose on prisoners inside Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, and American soldiers kept making their own pictures while torturing them. These incidents have inspired the international media and the international audience to turn against the war on terror. Friends, both these wars proved to be the turning point of American history, especially in the Afghan War. Like Vietnam, America was defeated decisively. This defeat destroyed America's sole superpower status, and a new multi-power world started coming into existence, in which Russia had assumed the status of veto power in its region of influence and China in its region of influence. Friends, History of America Season 1 concludes with this video. We have shown you the complete history of America in brief in 3 series, in which in the first season you saw how after crossing this small colorless strait, America entered America from Asia via Russia and how it established colonies there. Then we showed you how Columbus discovered America again, and then how the Europeans tamed the Native Americans. We presented different versions of history on this. After this, we also showed the story in detail that how America became a superpower and how it defeated 2 world powers.